Hey there, quirk connoisseurs. Welcome back to the grand finale of our epic series, What If? I'm your host, Chronos, and today, we're diving into the thrilling conclusion of What If Deku had matter manipulation, Part 3. First off, I gotta give a huge shout out to each and every one of you for sticking with us through this incredible journey. Your support has been off the charts, and I couldn't be more grateful. But hey, let's make this final part one to remember. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Chapter 11. Izuku found himself walking a familiar route today, to see someone he hadn't seen since he got into UA. All the while trying to calm his mind. What was the feeling of worry that wasn't prevalent unease? Izuku's mind since the USJ was undercut with a constant feeling of unease. It was because of an unkillable monster, a league capable of producing it, and a mysterious faction that wanted him that seemed to be separate from the league. He hoped Project Olympus would be ready soon. After speaking with Bakugo at his house and reassuring his mother 300 times that he was okay, he waited patiently for classes to restart. His phone pinging caught his attention. "Are you sure you're okay? Mother offered to send you our cook or our private doctor if necessary. Please tell me if you need someone to talk to, I can meet you somewhere." Yet another text from Momo, who wouldn't leave him alone. Izuku truly appreciated it, and he couldn't completely ignore the feeling of giddiness of such a pretty girl worrying over him. But the constant worry was grating on his nerves. It kept bringing up the feelings of worry and hopelessness the Nomu sparked in him. He wasn't going to recover and move on if he was constantly thinking about the USJ. He was getting sidetracked. Izuku shook his head and continued walking. He had been putting it off, a visit to someone who was likely very frustrated with his lack of presence recently. Master Ryujin was waiting for him at the fight dojo. Izuku took a deep breath and entered the building. Was it him, or was it giving off an ominous vibe? "Midoriya!" called Kaminari from inside. "We're all up on the sparring floor, hurry up!" "Coming!" Not even bothering to go to the lockers to change his outfit, he molded his street clothes with alchemy into a GI and made his way up to the sparring floor. He was given respectful nods as he made his way up and returned them in kind. He may have a terrible win-loss record, but no one could ignore his drive to improve while constantly getting his ass kicked every day. He had managed to calm himself down while climbing the stairs, but that all went out of the way when he noticed Master Ryujin standing in the center of the room with his arms crossed and narrowed eyes. "Midoriya!" he called with a huff. "You've neglected to return since you began at UA. I expected attendance to drop, but even the slacker here has shown several times," he said while throwing his head towards Kaminari. "Slacker! Dash!" Ryujin sent a look at Kaminari, silencing him, then continued. "Then I hear about your quirk from a colleague and confirm it was Sparky. Then there is the villain attack on the news, then the one at the USJ. He sighed tiredly. "I know you're stressed, but I've found the best way to work through stress is to fight. That's why I was upset you hadn't shown up." Izuku frowned. "I thought not fighting would help, you know. Get my mind right?" This was going against what his mother and recovery girl said. Laughed Ryujin. "For some people, normal people, sure. But you're too smart for something like that. You're an overthinker. Just look at how you've trained yourself. You spent years studying to enhance yourself rather than work on your quirk. Look at how far you've come when you focus on it." Izuku had to concede that, he supposed. Instead of diving deep into his quirk's applications over the years, he did hyper-focus on his enhancements. He could be halfway through the periodic table by now. Oh well. "So no. You need a mindless activity where you can let go and vent." Izuku nodded, since he could really see the logic in his words. "Who am I fighting?" asked Izuku while looking around the room. He thought he could beat some of the others now that he would use his quirk in combat now. Ryujin grinned. "Me. Well, fuck." 5 minutes later, Izuku was manipulating the molecules of sweat on his forehead into vapor to not show Ryujin just how nervous he was. He has never seen Ryujin fight personally, but he'd heard that his quirk was terrifying and his martial ability, as expected, was horrifying. "I'll let you start us off," said Ryujin with a relaxed stance. "And if you hold back with your quirk, I'll spank you in front of all these people." Izuku grunted and ignored the snickers of the audience. "You got this, Midoriya!" cheered Kaminari while blatantly recording the fight with his phone with an excited look on his face. Ryujin, quirk, string. He could create and manipulate strings. Simple, and sometimes that makes something stronger than elaborative powers. After all, elaborate complex things have rules to follow, string doesn't really. Izuku rushed forward, utilizing construction to create gauntlets over his fists and compacting air for his attack. He didn't bother holding back his speed nor his awareness of the world around him. It was a twitch, subtle, to anyone else they wouldn't see it, but Izuku had awareness of his surroundings that were so beyond normal people that it was like a strobe light. 3 strings were shot from Ryujin's right hand with barely a movement, but Izuku was forced to allow his air to disperse and block the strings with both gauntlets. Deep trenches were gouged into them where the strings tried to slash him, but he held firm. It was the velocity of the strings that he needed to worry about. They moved faster than the eyes could follow, which meant that he needed to focus on defense. Izuku pushed through the attack and continued forward without pausing. He jumped forward and avoided another string attack, and that was when Ryujin moved. The massive man lunged forward with speed that was unfair for someone without enhancements to have and tried to kick Izuku in the chest. However, as fast as Ryujin was, it was a crawl compared to Nomu. Izuku maneuvered around the kick and utilized his much smaller size to get inside his guard for an uppercut. As he was about to connect, his senses screamed at him, and he is able to pull back fast enough to avoid another set of strings carving into the ground where he was standing. Izuku grunted in annoyance. There didn't seem to be a required area of origin to generate those strings. It was as if he was forming them out of air or nothing. Well, time to kick it up a notch, sever. Izuku rushed forward with his mind focused on severing any and all strings that entered within 0.5 meters from his body. While this would protect him from the strings, or it should at least, he would have to handle everything else physically. Ryujin sent more strings at him that were instantly shredded. Izuku grinned and tried to tackle the man. But enhanced physiology or not, Ryujin just calmly redirected his momentum and threw him to the ground. Izuku shot to his feet and tried again. This time he stopped right as Ryujin was about to grab him, and grabbed his arm in return. Izuku's strength was superior, everyone knew that, so instead of trying to tug his way out, Ryujin loosened himself up and rolled with Izuku's throw to land without much damage. This is going nowhere. Izuku thought, thoroughly annoyed. He was focusing his quirk to counter Ryujin's, which left him with just physical combat, which he knew was impossible to win with. He had speed and power in spades, but he knew very well that it didn't matter against superior technique. He'd have to bluff. Ryujin was sending strings less and less frequently to be shredded by his barrier, likely slowly accepting that Izuku was just going to counter everything. That was good. He need to keep track of the intervals and fight Ryujin in the meantime till he has an opening to use his quirk on him. Which meant continued frontal assaults. This was going to hurt. Izuku went for a punch, countered viscously by an uppercut. A tackle, redirected to the floor and elbow dropped. Which was a crowd pleaser if the cheers were any indication. A kick, he was caught and thrown into the wall. No matter what he did, Izuku was being torn apart by Ryujin. However, during the beatdown he was keeping track of the strings, which had become nearly non-existent in the past minute. Izuku kept up the barrier for one more clash before taking a note out of Momo's book. Closing his fist, he used alchemy to change some pieces of clothes into dozens of small rubber pellets, then super compacted air into the same closed fist, then repeating it in his other hand. While this shouldn't hurt too bad, what would essentially become a rubber shotgun should do enough to catch him off guard. Getting in close, Izuku motioned like he was going for a quick jab, but at the apex of his motion he opened his fist to allow the rubber pellets to blast out toward Ryujin, then followed up with his other. Over 100 small rubber pellets blasted toward him at high speeds. The man barely reacted. He grunted in pain and reflexively closed his eyes, then he lashed out with his quirk in retaliation. It was spectacular. To the crowd the rubber pellets were destroyed in an instant. But to Izuku, whose perception was so beyond human it was incomparable, he saw it, he comprehended it. Hundreds upon hundreds of strings exploded from Ryujin's body, shredding and destroying every single pellet down to dust. An attack of this caliber could be called a super move by pros. If anything, its destructive potential is on par with a prominence burn from Endeavor. What a guy Ryujin is! Izuku thought withal. So impressed, Izuku didn't react in time to dodge Ryujin's takedown. By the time he refocused on the fight, he was face down on the mat. While he had the strength to get up, he instead blew a raspberry into the ground and gave up. "Thanks," said Izuku, voice muffled. "I'm not sure why, but my chest feels lighter." Ryujin got off his back and sat on the mat next to Izuku with a sigh. He spoke quietly so only Izuku heard his words. "Everyone is so used to All Might being unstoppable, unbeatable. You know?" he asked. "It doesn't surprise us when he wins. At this point he could fight a god and people would be over it by the end of the week." Izuka looked at him in confusion but didn't say anything. From what I understood, you witnessed him struggle to win. I could go as far to say that had you not been there, the fight would have been much worse before the big guy won. It must have been terrifying to see your idol, the symbol of peace, be pushed that far while fighting beside him. Izuka looked down at that. Ryujin continued. I know you, Midoriya. You keep to your thoughts to yourself and you overthink, side effect of your quirk's nature, I assume. So the teachers likely didn't understand your duress. Sure, the life or death aspect was terrible and something you're too young to face. Izuka's lip quivered but he remained silent. But you were shown just how dangerous the world can be that day, because for the first time in your life, the strongest hero in the world needed help in a fight, and that thought has made you question how safe you, everyone, really is. For if you had to help All Might win, what happens next time a villain that strong shows up and he isn't there to do the heavy lifting? What happens when it's just you or for some reason All Might can't fight anymore or is retired? Ryujin sighed. I'm not a pro, but I am strong. If I wanted I could break into the top 10, but I'm more of a teacher than a hero. Though I wanted to show you that there are people in this world, like me, that are stronger than you think that you can rely on. You're not alone, he said while flashing a smile as his down student. Izuka let out a choked breath and blinked away tears. Thank you, Ryujin-sensei. Ryujin ruffled Midoriya's hair with a small chuckle. Any time. Though I can't help if you don't bother to show up here, he said with a mock glare. Right, sorry, Izuka said with a flinch. A few hours later Izuka walked away from the fight dojo with a spring in his step and bruises on his face he couldn't bring himself to heal. The dull pain brought him reassurance rather than frustration. School was back in session. The days off from the USJ were over and students were expected to return to their normal schedules. Parents were reassured that the school had even more safety precautions than before, and they were even more prepared should another attack happen. Izuka smiled as he walked the familiar path to classroom 1A. That was until he was stopped by an arm grabbing him. An arm that was coming from the wall. Ah! Izuka shouted in shock, jumping away from the wall in fright. What the hell? Joyful laughter came from the wall before a large blonde teen seemingly phased through the wall and stood right in front of him. He was in a hero suit, red and white, with a large cape that fluttered behind him, on his chest the number 1,000,000 in red. It was the third year he met last week, Mirio Togata. Ha ha! I couldn't resist! Laughed Mirio while wiping a tear from his eye. Izuka sighed tiredly. Why? Mirio calmed himself, his smile ever present. I wanted to check on ya. Heard about the USJ, well, everyone has, but I know a bit more than most. Sir told me about it, and he especially told me of you and your actions. I will say he seems very interested in you. I think he knew of you before, but he never mentioned. Anyway, I just wanted to say great work and that Sir will be looking at you during the sports festival, so bring your A game. Izuka was about to respond when Mirio disappeared into the floor, just as randomly, and suddenly as he appeared he was gone. Izuka didn't bother wasting any more brain power trying to understand what happened and continued on to class. As soon as he opened the door he was attacked. Midoriya! Wailed Mina, Uraraka, Hagakure, and Momo while squeezing the life out of him with their worried hugs. The rest of the class watched from around the room, some talking amongst themselves as the commotion continued. We were so worried, Midoriya, you fought the big monster and… cried Mina with comical tears streaming down her face while squeezing his face into her chest. Uraraka was shaking him back and forth. I was so worried, you know. I wanted to help but I couldn't move, I was so scared. Hagakure wasn't saying much. In fact, it seemed like she just wanted to join the dog pile if her giggles were anything to go by as she held his arm. I've been worried sick, I hope you're aware you'll be making it up to me, Momo said with a frustrated frown. Normally Izuka could handle attention, or talk in groups. But they were all hugging, pulling or shaking him while talking at the same time, so all he could really do was wait for someone to save him. This was a hero school, so it shouldn't take long, right? Meanwhile, Mineta was crying for a different reason while Shiro and Kaminari sighed next to him. Guy has all the luck, a powerful quirk, and all the babes in class worried about him, wailed Mineta. Shiro agreed with a nod. I mean, he did do a lot of heavy lifting with that powerful villain, so I'll say he earned it. Didn't make it easier to watch though. He's always had strange luck with hotties, Kaminari said with a snort. Kirishima was tearfully holding up his fist. He's so manly. Izuka was saved by another person entering the class. It was a freshly healed and still irritable as ever Bakugo. He took one step into the classroom before glaring at the scene in front of him. Eh? Why is everyone around the nerd? He asked in his gruff manner. The girls instantly let go of Izuku before wailing and surrounding Bakugo in the same manner. Mina's tears were even larger as she squeezed Bakugo into her chest. You saved us! I'm so happy you're better, she said, though her voice was all garbled from the crying. Uraraka was violently shaking Bakugo back and forth. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up when you did. I owe you, Bakugo. I'm glad you're okay. Hagakure's giggles were even clearer than before as she latched onto Bakugo's arm. You had me worried for your safety, Bakugo. I trust when I message you about your well-being you'll respond next time, Momo said with a stern glare as she rested a hand on his shoulder. Mineta's eyes cried tears of blood as his anger and jealous were being pushed down by his gratitude toward his recent savior. He wouldn't air his complaints to the one who saved him, though it didn't mean he liked seeing others live out his dream. I get it, but it feels bad that a jerk like him gets that kind of attention, grumbled Ciro while scratching his head. Kaminari sighed. The guy stepped up at the USJ, we'd have all been in trouble without him. He didn't care for it either, though Jiro watching the commotion rather than joining made it easier. Kirishima was tearfully holding up his fist. He's so manly. Bakugo looked ready to blow up the building, but he found that his quirk no longer functioned. At the door stood a tired Aizawa with his quirk activated, having anticipated Bakugo's line of thought. Just take your seats, please, he said with a sigh before walking to the podium. Once the class was settled, he began. That was not something I'm thrilled you all had to experience. It was a life or death battle that you all shouldn't have gone through. But everyone survived and have been healed of your injuries, so I'll ask you this. He made sure to lock eyes with everyone for at least a moment before continuing. Now that you've seen the dangers of the hero world, are you gonna back down? The class didn't hesitate. Hell no! They all shouted as one. Aizawa grinned. Didn't think so? He continued. Well, with that in mind, you all better start training, cause there's another big fight coming, the UA Sports Festival, he announced with his arms spread dramatically. The class gasped, and he continued. This is a very important moment for all of you, a chance to show your worth as a prospective hero and get scouted for internships. Don't slack or it could have lasting consequences for your careers, said Aizawa with a serious glare on his face. Yes, sir, chanted the class. The sports festival was a bit over 2 weeks away, and the class trained either in groups or individually. Izuku actually worked with some of them on their techniques and quirks to assist them bring out more of their quirk's potential, while he worked on his own quirk and combo moves after school. It wasn't long, but the day of the sports festival was upon them, and Izuku felt he was ready to rock the competition. Meanwhile, in another part of Japan, 2 individuals sat in a dimly lit bar in front of several monitors, none of which had their cameras on. One had hands covering his body and sat at the bar in front of the monitors, while the other was sitting in a booth in the corner ignoring everything in the room while drinking from a glass. I see, so Nomu was captured after its defeat at the hands of All Might. Yes, sensei, confirmed Shigaraki quietly. Kurojairi was captured as well. A different monitor spoke up. That's no matter, Subject Dark Cloud had many fail-safes, it'll be returned in due time. The person spoke in a lazed tone. I trust my investments are going to pay off, despite this rather unfortunate setback? Asked the third monitor. The first monitor responded. But of course, I don't promise things I can't deliver. Though if you send your forces after him, then having mine bring him to you seems rather counterintuitive. Something that which successful businessmen understand is the usefulness of redundancy, the third voice said. What of the next phases of your plan? You've yet to fill me in on them. First, spoke Shigaraki before any of the monitors could answer. I retrieve Kurojairi, then I rip and shred everything All Might has built until only dust remains. Starting with that Yue, and the green-haired brat, he shouted in a crazed voice while decaying the glass he was holding. Of course, Tamura, the first voice said. I have just the idea on how to go about that. Chapter 12. The day of the sports festival had finally arrived. The entire class had been putting themselves through the ringer with their training. Izuku himself was polishing off his techniques while working on his hand-to-hand combat at the dojo with Ryujin. He was quite confident in his technique now that he has won 10 fights at the dojo in the past 2 weeks, which was better than the entire previous year. Izuku didn't know the extent of everyone's training or how far they'd come, but he knew that there were quite a few that would surprise the public. Sitting in their waiting room, Class 1A waited anxiously to be called to the arena. Most of the class was getting nervous due to the rest of the school basically declaring them targets due to the attention they'd received from the villain attacks. Izuku, however, wasn't nervous. He was taking all challengers after all. That was how one improved. Midoriya! Came the monotone voice of Todoroki, which gathered everyone's attention due to the silence. Izuku looked over at the two-toned boy. Yes? You trivialized my quirk that day, said Todoroki, referencing the battle trials. I want you to know that it won't happen again. I will defeat you today with my ice. As he spoke, Izuku noticed the look in Todoroki's eyes, cold and focused. He would be intimidated if he hadn't already beat him effortlessly weeks ago. Todoroki would be in for a rude awakening if he believed that he was the only one to grow stronger in the weeks since the trial. Well, I hope you have something in mind, Izuku said casually. 'Cause I can handle ice, maybe fire and ice together would be tougher? He added lightly. Todoroki glared and looked ready to speak, but Izuku continued. Although I did already handle fire with that villain attack a few weeks ago, so who knows? He shrugged. Instead of responding, Todoroki took a calming breath and pushed past him. Hey! Shouted Bakugo. You're declaring war against the wrong guy, icy hot. I'm the one who will win this, not either of you. I think these two are vastly underestimating everyone else here, Izuku thought with a sigh. Granted, he was very strong and so were those two, but the class wasn't full of slouches. Kaminari came up next to him with a chuckle. Those two are full of hot air. They only believe themselves to be strong. I'm confident I could take either of them if it came down to it. The pride of being born strong, and being told it every day by others. I'm sure there are quite a few here who could take them on, said Izuku with a nod. Kaminari hummed. What about that other guy that said he was going to take a spot from us? You know, the general education dude. Izuku rolled his eyes. No threat, I gave him a scan when he said all that. No real muscle mass, he's likely the type to rely completely on his quirk, and it certainly isn't physical, otherwise he would have passed. His quirk could be really strong? Asked Kaminari. Izuku shrugged. Not my problem, he has chip on his shoulder. I'll treat him the same I do Bakugo, let him talk then beat him if it comes to it. Before any more conversations could continue, an announcement to head to the stadium sounded throughout the room, ushering everyone out. Izuku patted his gym uniform down and did some quick calculations in his head. It would be fine if he needed to alter the material. Walking into the arena, he was shocked at the amount of people in the stands. On TV it never looked this big, but in person, there were tens of thousands of people, and that was a little nerve-wracking. And coming out of the northern tunnel, Class 1A, they are the survivors of a terrible villain attack. Give them a round of applause, folks. The loud voice of one of the festival's commentators, President Mike. The crowd answered the call from President Mike and roared with approval. Izuku took a deep breath to make sure his smile and wave didn't look too nervous. The others were having various degrees of success themselves. Next is Class 1B. While less know than their 1A counterparts, they are still hero students, so keep an eye on these promising upstarts. More cheers followed as the students from their sister class came out from the tunnel waving to the crowd with smiles. Izuku wondered if they had a PR class already. Okay, we have 3 rounds. The festivals always have a similar theme. The first is used to eliminate most of the competitors, then the second is a team exercise, then the tournament. I need to get a read on most of the competition this round for the team selection next time. Kaminari elbowed Izuku, getting his attention. Midnight is about to start, stop zoning out. Izuku nodded. Thanks. Midnight cracked her whip, gathering everyone's attention. Now before we begin we will hear from the student representative, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku took a deep breath as applause filled the arena. He was rather known due to the villain attack, so he was sure there were quite a few here just to watch him. As crazy as that is to think about. It was time, he would show the world his resolve. Getting to the mic, he calmed himself with another deep breath. I've wanted to be a hero my whole life. Ever since I was little and I watched a recording of All Might's debut, I was inspired. Though it wasn't his strength, it wasn't his unknown power, or even his success in saving hundreds of people by himself. It was the fact that his presence removed the despair of those in trouble and inspired hope. To me, that is what it means to be a hero. So that is what I'll do. I'll be the next beacon for you all. If any of you doubt my words, then just watch me, he declared as he gazed into the crowd unflinchingly. It was as if the world stopped at his declaration. He could feel the piercing stares of several individuals around the arena, likely taking his declaration as a challenge. The words of President Mike and Aizawa were lost to him as he gazed around the arena at all the different people and pros out there. Looking out into the crowd of students, he saw the effects his words had on his fellow students. Some were smiling and nodding along with him, they likely felt the same. Some looked more determined than ever while Kirishima was tearfully holding up a fist. He did that a lot, come to think of it. After a second the bubble burst, and the crowd responded with roaring applause. At the top of the arena there was a lounge. It was a special place for those that wanted privacy. It was for prestigious VIPs and UA alumni like Best Jeanist and Endeavor if they ever wished to watch undisturbed by the crowd. Today, individuals were in attendance that otherwise would have skipped due to the recent events involving Izuka Midoriya and UA. They had varying reactions to Izuka's speech. A blonde woman had a sharp smile on her face. She wore a red sleeveless dress, though most prominent was a silver dragon claw covering the right side of her face. Pro Hero Rank 10 Ryukyu hummed at the words of Izuka Midoriya as she laid her head on her perfectly manicured hand. A man in ninja attire with his hair in a unique pointy shape sat silently in the corner with shadows hiding his expression. But his fists clenched at the boy's words in agreement. He's Pro Hero Rank 5 headshot. Whoa! I love it! I love it! Ha 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 ha, what spunk! I knew it would be worth coming. Ever since that video of him taking on those villains I knew he'd be interesting. Roared a woman in a tight white leotard with a massive grin. She had tan skin, long white hair, a bunny tail and rabbit ears. She's Pro Hero Rank 6 Miruko. I bet he kicks your son's ass matchstick. Ha ha! A massive man in a blue and red hero suit with large flames burning around his neck, hair and face growled at her words. He's Pro Hero Rank 2 Endeavor. Quiet, you obnoxious woman! His face, while lightly irritated, revealed very little of his thoughts. Next to him a woman with white hair and a soft smile watched the speech, though she had eyes for only one person in the sea of students. She laid a calming hand on Endeavor's arm, getting him to lean back with frown directed at the rabbit hero. Let's not be too hostile here, man. She's just trying to stroke that fire of yours, came the laid-back yet amused voice of a younger man. He was in a tan bomber jacket and matching pants with red glasses and large red wings. He's Pro Hero Rank 3 Hawks. His words brought a soft laugh from the woman with Endeavor and a grunt from the man. The doors to the lounge opened and walked in a massive wall of muscle with his red, white, blue, and golden suit gleaming in the light. The symbol of peace himself, the hero of heroes, Pro Hero Rank 1 All Might entered with a grin. Young Midoriya has the charisma of a true hero. But the other students are full of potential, so pay attention to them all. All the heroes in the room gave All Might glances of varying degrees of respect. Miruko had a grin full of battle lust as she looked at the pinnacle of power barely containing the desire to fight the living legend. Edge shot, though no one saw it, bowed his head in respect for a moment. Ryukyu and Hawks smiled that the elusive number 1 hero made an appearance. Neither of them had spent much time in the presence of the symbol of peace. Endeavor stood suddenly and moved directly in front of All Might. Both men were huge compared to the others in the room, All Might standing just over 7 feet tall with massive muscles. Endeavor was nearly a match in size, standing 6'5" with muscles just as built. Tension in the room skyrocketed, as did the temperature, as Endeavor's flames became more dense as they matched his emotions. The center of the flames started to change to the color blue. Neither spoke as the tension and the heat continued to rise, until the fire and heat in the room vanished from a blast of icy wind from the white-haired woman, who moved a few steps behind Endeavor. Her face was calm and gentle, but the power she displayed, removing all of Endeavor's heat and flame instantly, caught the attention of all in the room. "NG, please remember what you promised me," she said while lowering her arm. The stare down continued for a few more moments, All Might neither frowning nor smiling as he waited for Endeavor to do something. They have had a number of stare downs in the years since their argument. Endeavor looked down as he calmed himself. "All Might, you were right." The man looked very pained to say those words. "I made a mess of things. I would like to speak to you more in private soon." With that the man turned and walked back to his seat. The woman walked up to All Might with a smile. "It is good to see you again, All Might. I hope my son has been a good student." "It has indeed been a long time, Rei. You're looking as lovely as ever," All Might said with a smile. "Young Shoto is a dedicated student, though I worry of his fixation on his eyes half." Rei looked down sadly. "NG and I were terrible parents," she whispered to herself, though All Might heard it. "We're trying to fix our messes. Shoto rarely speaks to us since I came home last month. I had hoped Yue would get through to him since we couldn't. Though I would understand if he hated me." Her eyes teared slightly. "His face bears my greatest regret, and like the scar his anger seems to never fade." All Might laid a hand on her shoulder. He noticed that all the others in the room, save Endeavor, were more interested in the rules for the obstacle race than their conversation. Do not worry, young Todoroki may surprise you yet. I think today will be full of surprises. Let the race begin, announced President Mike. The race is 5 kilometers and there are quite a few obstacles. Izuku tuned out the instructions from midnight as he prepared himself for the race. He could feel his classmates readying themselves to take him down. Next to him, Uraraka and Momo were bouncing on their heels getting ready to go, and Kaminari was centering himself with slow breaths. Izuku, I hope you know I'll be coming after you today, Momo said suddenly. You're one of the strongest people I know, so I plan to take you down. Uraraka's competitive spirit flared and the area around her became heavy. Nope. I'm talking down Izuku and Bakugo. I'm ignored yet again, sighed Kaminari. Hopefully this event is eye-opening for you people. Let the race begin, announced President Mike. Izuku shot forward with as much power as he could, barreling through several students in front of him. His awareness of the area around him allowed him to respond to the incoming wave of ice immediately, just like at the trial, though he only made the anti-ice barrier 5 millimeters from his body so no one else would benefit from his actions. This allowed him to quickly make it to the front of the crowd and escape the starting tunnel. Bakugo slammed down next to him with an explosion and Izuku turned around to face him, both still moving forward as they stared each other down. Todoroki arrived in a wave of ice, causing the three of them to glare at each other. There it is, folks, the top students of 1A staring each other down, announced President Mike with excitement. I wonder about that, Aizawa followed up in his monotone voice. Before the three of them could begin, all of them were slammed into several times by high-speed punches that none of them could react to, taking them off their feet. Izuku grunted to himself. He was too focused on his anti-ice barrier that his awareness didn't tell him about the incoming attacks. The three looked over to see who took them down. Kaminari, sparking with golden arcs of lightning, appeared on the other side of the three of them, not even facing them as he was about to speed on to continue the race. Allow me to pass through for a sec, he said before pushing off again. Izuku was the first to react and follow after him, but both Bakugo and Todoroki were right behind him. Izuku created several points from his body that were blasting dense streams of air to propel him even quicker alongside his impressive speed. Bakugo shot off the ground with rapid-fire explosions to propel him through the air at incredible speeds. Meanwhile, Todoroki created a massive pillar of ice to move forward as fast as he could. Izuku took the time to look at the competition. He noticed that Momo was flying behind them with rocket boots, weaving in and out of the crowd as she was staying relatively low to the ground while quickly catching up the front. Tokoimi was literally flying in the air with dark shadow. It was actually quite impressive. Uraraka was moving at speeds that were leagues above where she was on their first day. Ida was blitzing through the crowd with ease, his movements far more fluid and confident than before. Izuku would have continued to admire the competition if massive zero-pointer robots didn't appear in front of him. He noticed that Kaminari had just finished dashing past them after giving a robot a quick jolt to pass through without issue. Seems there are quite a few standouts. How will the rest respond to this robo-combo? President Mike shouted with a grin. With excessive force, I'm sure, responded Aizawa. You're no fun. Izuku dashed forward, foregoing the air propulsion, and went with a classic technique. Utilizing construction to manipulate the building blocks of the universe, he created a gleaming custom blade similar to the one he used for the entrance exam. Nearing the robot, he grinned and added another layer to his sword, something he was confident few if anyone could replicate without a quirk. Since his sword was constructed perfectly at an atomic level, he was able to play with it a bit. With his quirk, he started to vibrate the blade at an extremely high frequency. The robot lurched forward to smash him, but Izuku jumped to meet the attack with his sword. With as much strength as he could muster, he swung his blade vertically from top to bottom. The arm coming at him was perfectly bisected, and the robot behind it was too. There was even a gorge about 20 centimeters deep cut into the ground behind the zero-pointer for a few meters. The crowd roared alongside President Mike, and he turned to see that several of the other zero-pointers were being taken out by his classmates. Bakugo turned into a spinning top and literally smashed through it with a violent explosion. Todoroki froze his solid and kept running. Momo created a set of mini-missiles from a shoulder-mounted launcher thing that blew hers up. Uraraka punched hers into the wall, and it crashed with a crater. He guessed she removed its gravity, punched it, then added the gravity back as it flew, but he wasn't completely sure. Izuku shook himself out of his observations and continued on to catch up to Kaminari. He was only about 60 meters ahead, but enough that Izuku needed to push himself to catch up. In the lounge above the stadium, the top heroes in the country watched with excited gazes. Ed Shot was actually standing near one of the windows watching with rapt attention. "Capable, fast, precise," he said while staring intently at Kaminari. "That one will be in the top 10 without question." "That's high praise for a shinobi to give," mused Ryukyu as she peered down at the students. "My darling Nijire told me there were potential jewels in this year, but I too am surprised. I could beat him, her too, that would be interesting, not too weak, too situational," said Maruko as she went through each of the students in the race one by one. "Hey Matchstick! Your kid is good but way too stiff and boring. I like the blonde with the attitude, he's got spunk." "Obnoxious woman," grunted Endeavor to himself. "Meh, this part is always lame," Hawks said while sipping on a soda. "I'll say that I'm not unimpressed with some of them. Midoriya's quirk is interesting. Just what is it, All Might?" The rest of the heroes glanced at the man to hear his answer. All Might didn't look away from the race as he answered. "It's not quite a secret, but he doesn't go around sharing it. I'll say you should be able to figure it out if you keep watching. Seems you influenced more than his desire to inspire others but to also keep his quirk a secret," said Rei as she continued to watch Shoto run through the course. "Is it dangerous information?" "Could be, I imagine, and young Midoriya agrees that he was attacked because of his quirk," answered All Might. The heroes turned back to the event now that the conversation died back down. With the 0-pointers behind them, they approached obstacle number 2, a huge pit with platforms spaced out far enough that it would be difficult for someone without a quirk's help to jump to. Thankfully, there were ropes going from each one to allow people to cross. Kaminari, who was still in the front of the race, was running without his lightning enhancements. Izuku assumed that it was quite taxing, otherwise with the speed he showed at the beginning he would have won already. With his built-in enhancements, Izuku was able to easily jump from one platform to another. Towards the middle of the pit on a platform, he was interrupted from continuing by a pink-haired woman swinging down next to him. She was in a tank top and the gym pants. Her standout features were her pink dreadlocks and large goggles. The tank top also made other features stand out as well, not to mention the various forms of equipment surrounding her body. "Heya!" she shouted before jumping right off the edge with a huge grin. Izuku reached forward to catch the insane girl before she pulled out a grapple gun thing and shot herself over to the next platform. Shaking himself out of his thoughts, he noticed that he was being passed by several other students. He refocused and continued on, this time adding in his air propulsion and making a cone around the front of his body to highly reduce wind resistance. It didn't take long for him to overtake Crazy Girl and the rest that snuck by in his stupor. Matter of fact, he was catching up to Kaminari, who was slowing down as he reached the third obstacle. "What's wrong?" Izuku shouted as he barreled past him without hesitation. Then he noticed the sign reading Minefield and skidded to a stop. He deactivated his air and resistance cone and stretched his awareness to find all the mines in front of him. It would be tough as there didn't seem to be a set pattern of placement, but he could feel all of the mines in front of him, and he started moving forward. Kaminari decided to follow behind him as he was making a safe path through the mines. Unfortunately, they were being gained on by students that didn't have to worry about stepping foot on the ground. Momo and Uraraka were in the air and gaining on them. Bakugo was right on their tail as well. Izuku huffed and pushed off as fast as he could. He did his best, but he was still hit by a few mines. Thankfully, his speed allowed him to be hit from behind, and his durability made it so he didn't get knocked off his feet. The tunnel neared, and Izuku knew that if Kaminari was going to make a move for first, it would be now. Before the lightning rod could blitz him, Ida showed himself and attacked them with a flying kick. Both barely managed to dodge by ducking, and they didn't hesitate to respond. Kaminari responded with a lightning blitz, stunning both of them for a moment, and Izuku changed the ground beneath their feet to sand rapidly, which caused both to trip up. He followed up by making a massive amount of water above them, then freezing it, making them have to roll to avoid the large chunks of ice. Todoroki arrived and froze the entire ground, and Bakugo immediately made his presence known by turning the entire back half of the field into a crater with his arrival. Then it became a 5-way brawl. Izuku was weaving around pillars of ice and Ida kicks. Kaminari was blitzing through explosions and shocking whoever he hit. Todoroki was changing the environment with large-scale ice attacks that Bakugo would annihilate with his explosions. They were interrupted by the arrival of Momo, who sent a volley of mini-missiles that carpet-bombed the area. Thankfully, they were far less potent than the ones she used to blow up the 0-pointer, so no one was critically hurt. Uraraka showed up through the smoke and punched Bakugo right in the stomach. He lurched forward before falling to the ground, causing a large crater. He coughed painfully before Uraraka turned away and his body relaxed. You can increase gravity too? Izuku asked, shocked, now understanding what she was doing. Uraraka giggled. Yep. New trick Aizawa-sensei helped me with. She shouted, very pleased, before bouncing forward trying to win. She was stopped by Todoroki, who froze her into a dome, though he was kicked onto his back by Ida, coming in with a double drop kick, who then turned to a runner stance and blasted toward the tunnel to take first for himself. Izuku made to stop him, but Kaminari beat him to it and unleashed a devastating punch to Ida's face that threw him towards Momo, who maneuvered out of the way with her rocket boots. As she made to fly over them, Izuku reached out and with his quirk shredded the internal components of her boots, causing her to fall to the ground. The ice dome shattered and Bakugo roared in anger as he cupped a hand in front of his other palm. Dozens and dozens of angry orange bombs shot from his hand, causing another carpet bombing even larger than Momo's. Bakugo was too angry to focus on one target, causing everyone to dodge and do their best to avoid being blown up by the blonde. Izuku decided this was his best bet. Though he took some damage from the bombs, he was able to ignore them with his durability and sprint through the finish line. There it is, folks. After a crazy free-for-all at the finish, Izuku Midoriya takes first place. Those kids seem to be a cut above the rest, cheered Present Mike. The bunch at the end are towards the top of the year in maneuverability, so it's no surprise they were towards the front, Aizawa said, bringing the energy back down. I'm impressed that Izuku was able to force himself to leave a fight like that to win the race. He's had some issues with tunnel vision. There you go, making a win less fun. Anything else to add? Want to regale us with tales of your cat? Well, I did get a second one last week, and I'll stop you right there before people turn the channel. We have our second place, Denki Kaminari, who has impressed us all with his showing so far, followed closely by Tenya Ida and Momo Yayorozu. Katsuki Bakugo rounding up fifth place, with Shoto Todoroki in sixth and Ochako Uraraka in seventh. We have more in the minefield now, though it's half the size after that brawl. Izuku sat down with his back against the stadium wall. He absent-mindedly healed any scrapes or bruises he received and fixed his gym uniform. He placed his hand on the ground and changed the sand into a drinking glass that he then filled with water. It was nice being able to make a drink anywhere he wanted. Can I have one of those? Kaminari asked as he sat down next to him. Nodding, Izuku repeated the process and handed the glass over to him. Second isn't bad, said Izuku with a smile. You've really improved with your quirk, man. I remember your old fire all you've got and hope for the best method. He laughed. Kaminari chuckled as he guzzled down water. I've gotten better, but I'm not that great at long distance yet. I'm more of an agile fighter. Ida had me beat in the distance running overall. I just had more acceleration and a higher top speed. I'd like one of those too, said Momo as she walked up to them and plopped down onto the ground. Izuku once again repeated the process and handed over the water. Since when could you make rockets? Kaminari asked. Momo looked away a bit shyly for a second before answering. I actually could make them for a while, it's just now that I can make them usable for hero work. I worked with Power Loader on schematics these past few weeks, now I have a much wider arsenal to draw from. She finished with a grin. Izuku shook his head. I don't even want to say something that could give you ideas. Can you make lasers? Asked Kaminari with wide excited eyes. What about cannons? What about? What did I just say? Izuku interrupted with a bewildered look. What? He asked. I'm not afraid of giving her ideas. I think it would be cool to have a mecha badass in the class. Momo gave Kaminari a wide smile. Thank you, Kaminari. To answer your questions, I can make a lot of things. That's all you're gonna say, isn't it? Uh-huh. The three sat in silence for a moment as more and more people crossed the finish line. Izuku idly noticed that Tsuyu was helping Uraraka catch her breath. New quirk facets were tiring. He knew that. This must have been the first time she really pushed it. Bakugo was glaring at the wall while Todoroki was steaming, literally steaming off to the side. Izuku wasn't sure what was up with that. All right, now that brawl at the end was a nice appetizer, Maruko said with a grin. I can't wait till the finals. Sparky and Ingenium Jr. are quite fast. Endeavor gazed at his steaming son with a small frown. He is going to need his fire if he wants to beat his classmates, he muttered lowly. Ray nodded. He isn't dumb, Enji. He knows that his ice alone won't be enough. He is just so angry that he... She trailed off, forcing back her tears of frustration. Ryukyu sipped on a glass of wine with a smirk. Those girls have potential. I want them, she said as she turned her gaze from Momo to Uraraka. None of you send them offers. Her tone was firm and sounded as if she was ready to battle for her claim. Easy there, said Hawks with a raised hand while the other was holding a batch of fries. No one's gonna poach your little prospects. Murako snorted. I don't do internships, I'm just here to enjoy the show, she said while crunching on a large carrot. Ejot didn't say anything, but he was impressed with the showing, particularly from two students. One needed some work, the other needed experience, and both needed better conditioning. Meanwhile, All Might looked down at his American-style lunch, a large triple bacon cheeseburger with all the trimmings, a mountain of fries, and a shake with a fond expression. It was thanks to the young man sipping on water laughing with his friends that he was able to eat all of this food and sit among peers in his hero form. There would be a small break before the second event, so he was going to enjoy his meal and listen to his colleagues ponder what the next event would be. Even though he knew, he was excited at what was to come. Chapter 13. Izuku stood with Kaminari and Momo as the intermission between the race and the second event finished up. He was pleased to know that pretty much all of 1A made it through the race. Some had shown some impressive results to their training. Like Tokoyami, who for a good portion of the race was flying through the air, though he couldn't sustain it in the direct sunlight for that long. Or Tsuyu, whose speed and jumps had improved enough that she was in the top 20. It was nice to see that they weren't going to settle for only training when at school but in their own time. Now, let's begin with the next event, the cavalry battle, announced Midnight while displaying a scoreboard with all the top placers. Izuku skipped reading over most of it to notice that he was worth 10 million points, which basically meant that he was going to be the target for the entire event. Great. Now you'll need to find groups. The rider will have the total number of their team's points on a headband. The 4 teams with the most points at the end move on to the finals. Get to work, you have 10 minutes to team up, Midnight announced with a crack of her whip. Izuku turned to Kaminari. Team? He asked hopefully. Nope, Kaminari said with a smile. You beat me last round, I'm aiming for you this time. With that he walked off to find his own team. Izuku looked over to see that Momo was also moving away with a determined look in her eyes. Izuku sighed. He really needed a team, and it would seem that his target made most want to go after him rather than work with him. Heya! Shouted a voice from behind him. Izuku flipped around to notice the pink-haired girl grinning at him as she rushed towards him. Let's team up! Really? He asked, completely nonplussed. She nodded vigorously. Yep. All eyes are on number 1 and I want to show off my babies. So I'm being used. I appreciate the honesty, I guess. He thought with a sigh. Okay, then we need 2 more people. Izuku scanned the crowd. Most were paired up, but he noticed a few that gave him some ideas. Murako sighed lamely as she sipped on carrot juice. So a team battle, really taking me out of this festival. Ryukyu peered over at her with a raised eyebrow. Oh, you'd prefer they not test the children's team capabilities? She asked despite knowing the answer. The rabbit hero snorted. Yeah, I couldn't care less if these brats can work as a team. I just want to see some action. Endeavor glanced at Murako. That's because you're only interested in violence, rather than the important aspects that it takes to be a hero. Yeah, and you're the shining example of what a hero should be? Murako questioned with a glare. Endeavor glared at her. I am a far better one than you, someone who only cares for thrills. The rest of the room looked uneasily at the exchange as it was getting more and more heated, no pun intended. You know, I heard some rumors about you over the years. Didn't you ruin your FA? Hawk shot up between them, wings spread wide. Okay. Let's just calm down before something violent happens. Causing both heroes to sit back down. Hawks looked back and forth between them before he sat back down himself. He didn't really care that they would fight. He was more worried about Rei and the haunted look that came to her eyes for a moment. Clearly, she wasn't comfortable around Endeavor when he got too heated. He too had heard rumors, and his connections in the Public Hero Safety Commission confirmed some of them. Seemed that Endeavor and his wife were quite the power couple back in the day. Both with ambition to rise to the top. Endeavor as a hero, ideally the number 1, and Rei wanting to rise from the poverty of her birth family. Business partners turned life partners, and a wedding eventually came of it. First few years were happy from what he was told. Then Endeavor discovered the true distance between himself and All Might. The anger of his constant failures caused him to turn to his oldest son, a boy with stronger fire than Endeavor from birth. Some say it was an accident, some a rage-filled outburst from Endeavor, but one thing was certain. An entire mountain was burned by blue flames and Toya Todoroki was pronounced dead. Marriage became strained and the info gets murky, but Rei suffered a mental breakdown after permanently scarring her youngest son's face. Endeavor committed her to a psych ward for years and she was only just released. Hawk's eyes narrowed. That was the story he was able to put together over the last few weeks. But he wasn't sure, it all seemed off. Why would Rei come back in the first place? Why would Endeavor apologize to All Might? Hawks doubted that was the full story and he was far too curious not to want to get to the bottom of it. Meanwhile, All Might looked at the Todorokis with a sad frown. He felt regret on his part in their argument. While he doesn't feel the events in their family were his doing, he didn't help either nor make it easier. You inherited your father's stubbornness and mother's drive to succeed, young Toya. I could see their pride in you when they introduced you to me. I could see their anguish when you died. I should have seen the darkness growing in Endeavor, or the instability in Rei. Your brother has suffered and is still suffering. All Might looked down at the field. Most of the teams were established, and they were waiting for the next event to start. The bicolored boy was looking at nothing as he waited, likely lost in his thoughts. I hope you could forgive an old man for not seeing the state of my student till today. I promise I'll do what I can for your little brother, young Toya. Sato stretched his arms with a huff. Surprised you asked me to join you. Midoriya smirked. I think you have some serious potential. You as well, I mean you flew, he said while looking at their last member, Tokoemi. The bird of darkness nodded. Through the powers of darkness I have achieved flight. He means I'm carrying him, shouted Dark Shadow. Yes. Midoriya nodded. Cool, Tokoemi you're up front, Mei on the left, and Sato on the right. They got into their formation while Izuku was lifted up to be the rider. He tied on his headband and huffed. This was going to be a game of keep away for the most part, but he was pretty sure it was pointless. The headband was only a couple grams, it's impossible to take it from him. All we have to do is defend and ward off big attacks that can knock us over and cause us to lose. Sato flexed. No worries, I got sugar to spare. We're going to be solid, then it's to the finals. The darkness is our ally, added Tokoemi. Yeah. I was born from it, shouted Dark Shadow. Mei giggled as she adjusted her gear. As long as my babies are there to shine. Midoriya smirked. His team was quite solid. Sato's strength will be a strong foundation. Mei had gadgets and wouldn't go away if he asked, so he was stuck with her regardless. Finally, Tokoemi was a nice mid-range combatant with a near-impossible-to-predict moveset. Bakugo's team was impressive, Shiro, Mina, and Kirishima. Close, mid, and long-range coverage between them and just the sheer ferocity of Bakugo leading them was terrifying. Todoroki had Momo, Ida, and Kaminari. Midoriya glared at his sparky friend. So you go to his team? He shouted out with a mock glare. Kaminari grinned. Hey, he's got nice coverage and you're the person in first place. So I'm taking you down. No hard feelings, buddy. He shouted back with a smile. And you? Midoriya shouted at Momo. She actually looked sheepish. You're in first, she said with a shrug. Typical. He constantly suffers for his success. At this point he should fail something so his friends would actually work with him. Uraraka was on a team with a Class A Class B hybrid makeup. She, the orange-haired girl, Metal Guy, and Jiro. Interesting team, but she was supporting the orange-haired girl with a smile. Now let's kick this off, shouted Midnight, getting the crowd to cheer. We have a solid mix of teams here. Any comments, Eraserhead? No, not really. You've heard it here, folk. Class 1A's teacher is not helpful whatsoever. That's hurtful. Will you add something then? Well, you interrupted me when I tried to tell everyone about my new cat. And I'll stop you right there again. Kick it off, Midnight. Midnight, really everyone in the arena, gave unimpressed stares at the commentary booth for a solid minute. Well, let's go. Second event of the sports festive, cavalry battle start, shouted Midnight to the roar of an excited crowd. Sato chomped down on some sugar cubes before slamming his foot down on the ground, cracking the foundation, causing the teams trying to attack from that side to lose their footing. Midoriya compacted as much air as he could and shot it off like a shockwave on the other side, buffering the approaching storm of students. Mei grinned. Now here's baby number 134. The buffer missed. She took out several metal balls and threw them out in front of them in a half circle. A silver fog erupted from the devices, completely hiding them from view. What is that made of? The chemical compound is strange? Asked Midoriya as they moved away. Dark Shadow was far above, keeping a bird's eye view. My baby's unique. It can, not only obscure view, but it's heavy and hard to move through, not to mention it sticks to clothing and tastes pretty bad. Laughed May as she observed her tool's field applications. I'm borrowing it, Midoriya said before focusing on another team in his blind spot. This time it was a team led by the purple-haired student that declared war on them. Fumi, more students at 4 o'clock. Called out Dark Shadow, now having noticed the purple-haired team. The purple-haired boy glared at them. You think your purple chicken calling us out makes a difference? What did you just call me? Shouted Dark Shadow. Bring me your headband. Izuku wondered why the boy would just say that when he noticed Dark Shadow blitzing towards him. Tokoyami! Shouted Midoriya. Tokoyami's face was stuck between pain and fear, unable to control his own movements. I don't know. I can't stop him. Izuku raised his arm to block Dark Shadow's initial assault before punching it away. It seemed the pain from the attack was enough to knock them out of their stupor. Both Tokoyami and Dark Shadow looked dazed but no longer out of control. Izuku managed to turn to see the purple-haired boy in his face reaching for the headband. His hand wrapped around the headband caused Izuku to look at him with a grin. Tell me your name! The boy looked at him in slight wonder as he tried to pull the headband but with no luck. I told you and the rest of your class a week ago. I didn't care then because it was just barking. Izuku's grin became sharper and a large gash appeared on his cheek, causing a steady stream of blood to fall from his face. You're insane, the purple-haired boy replied when noticed the new wound. You realized my quirk and knew pain could undo it, Hitoshi Shinso. He answered, a small grin taking over his face. You won't make it far today unless you go after another team, said Izuku with yet another gash appearing on his face and his grin becoming more excited. You're an interesting guy. Shinso's small grin widened further as he looked wondrously at the boy who was slashing his own face without even a sign of discomfort. You are too. Izuku created water and sprayed Shinso's team and then blasted them with freezing air, causing them to lock up and shiver uncontrollably. Sato stomped again and the team moved away, following along with his momentum. The arena was chaos. Most of the big teams were focusing on racking up a lot of points and not on him. Seems most were aware that getting his headband was going to be a tall order when most didn't know his quirk or were his class and knew he was going to be a pain to get through. That being said, a massive wave of ice rushed them and Izuku created a wall in front of them of his ice-to-vapor barrier. Izuku shook his head. I feel like I need to remind you once again that ice isn't going to work, buddy, he shouted. Todoroki's team became visible through the cloud of dust and mist. The bicolored boy glaring at him manically. Momo and Kaminari looking at him with determination, and Ida was amping himself up for something. I refuse. I won't give up! Along with Todoroki's proclamation, with a massive wave of ice that covered the ground and avoided Izuku and his team for the most part. Then 2 large glaciers rushed them from either side. Izuku made another wall but found that he was being spread thin and was unable to do anything about the incoming mini-missiles from Momo. I've got dash! Started Tokoyami before he was interrupted by Mei. No! I've got it! She shouted, somehow looking ecstatic that missiles were coming her way. She pulled out a handgun-shaped device with 3 barrels and shot them into the air. Say hello to baby number 140, anti-air armament assistant! She exclaimed as she fired. From the barrels came a huge spread of bead-like pellets that shot toward the incoming missiles and shredded through them, setting off the explosions midair. They are small devices I made that magnetize towards the types of metals typically used in missiles, then shred them in the air before they can cause damage. Momo pouted at her attack not working. Todoroki was switching it up and sent smaller fast bursts of ice at them in wide unpredictable angles that was really starting to annoy Izuku. Tokoyami and Sato waited for either their chance to attack or prepare for when they'll need to defend. Ida's face hardened and his mouth moved, but Izuku and his team couldn't hear what was said. Kaminari's face relaxed as he focused, and Momo closed her eye for a second. Get ready, said Izuku. Feel like they're about to do something. Sato, get another stomp ready. May reload that gun thing, dash, baby. Right, Tokoyami, be ready to adapt. It was at that moment that Ida made himself known. His legs lit up and blue flames sprouted from the back. Kaminari on the flank began sparking with golden streaks of lightning, and Team Todoroki blitzed forward at speeds only Izuku was able to follow. Todoroki met his eyes and for an instant the world stopped. Izuku, for the first time since school started, really looked at his classmate. He didn't look angry, he didn't look even remotely worried about the festival or event, any of it. If Izuku could put his finger on it, he'd say that Todoroki looked sad. Izuku didn't acknowledge Sato smashing the earth around them with a stomp, Kaminari stabilizing Team Todoroki, Tokoyami sending out Dark Shadow only for Momo to produce several LED bulbs in front of her, forcing the shadow creature from advancing. All he could do was stare at Todoroki, who, for every millimeter he moved closer to his headband, he became less and less worried. That being said, Izuku's arm shot out incredibly fast and snatched all of Todoroki's headbands he had secured around his neck while his was taken by Todoroki. Time resumed at a normal pace for Izuku as Team Todoroki passed by them with the rest of Ida's special move. "Midoriya, what happened?" shouted Sato when he noticed they lost the 10 million point headband. The green-haired boy looked down at the headbands he stolen with a frown. "I'm not sure, I think I got distracted." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter, I'll get it back right now." Izuku raised his arm and grabbed his headband with his quirk. Todoroki looked down in surprise before clenching his fist and encompassing it in ice. Izuku started to vaporize the ice when... "Stop!" shouted Present Mike. "That's the event, ladies and gentlemen." Izuku blew a raspberry in frustration. "That's on me, we should have enough to proceed," he assured them. "Let's tally up those numbers, everyone." Everyone turned to a big digital screen where the results were shown and the top 4 teams, and the ones to go to the finals, were revealed. "In 4th place we have Team Itsuka with a very nice to see interclass team makeup," announced Present Mike. The crowd applauded the team consisting of Itsuka Kendo, Uraraka Ochako, Tetsu, and Kyokujiro waved to the crowd with varying degrees of awkwardness. Then Team Midoriya. They were in first the whole time before a classic Ida speed blitz changed the game. Izuku and the others waved to the cheering crowd. The others looked thrilled while Izuku was busy looking over at Todoroki, who was staring at the headband in his hand with a blank expression. Then, to no one's surprise, Team Bakugo. This hurricane of force and aggression has every headband that the other 3 surviving teams aren't holding. Bakugo, Siro, Mina and Kirishima all grinned at the cheering fans basking in the glory. Finally, the team to end with the 10 million point headband. Team Todoroki. The crowd exploded for the winning team. Todoroki seemed unfazed while Momo, Kaminari and Ida were wearing large smiles as they waved to specific spots in the crowd. Bakugo Mitsuki was grinning ferally as she grabbed and squeezed the light-headed Inko Midoriya. "See that? See that?" shouted Mitsuki. "My baby is out there kicking some serious ass, ha ha ha." Inko tried to get herself under control as the nerves of seeing Izuku in such a violent environment was getting to her. Not to mention Mitsuki was shaking her back and forth quite a lot. "Yes, he certainly did very well," Inko told the Pound Mom with a smile. Mitsuki finally let go of the woman with a smile. "That boy of yours is as impressive as I thought after that villain attack on TV. I mean, I never thought that shy son of yours was such a badass, but he really is. I can see why Katsuki respects him so much." That surprised Inko. "Izuku always said Katsuki hated him and was very vocal about it," she said with wide eyes. It never made her happy that the son of her best friend didn't like her son, but Izuku never said it really upset him or bothered him, so she didn't really mention it. Mitsuki snorted. "That boy is, what was it the kids call it, tsundere," she said with a snicker. "If my son goes out of his way to train as hard as he does for months all the while mentioning the same name over and over, then he acknowledges them as special." Inko's face must have shown her astonishment as Mitsuki full out laughed. "Yeah, he's a weirdo. No idea where he gets it though," she said with a frown. "Yeah," muttered Inko. "You're both too much." Nanao Yaoyorozu smiled at seeing both her daughter proceed to the finals and that wonderful Midoriya Izuku proceed as well. Honestly, they were a handsome couple, even if her daughter didn't have the experience to close the deal with the boy who also seems incapable of following through. "Young Ms. Momo has truly come into her own. Hasn't she, Mrs. Yaoyorozu?" the man next to her said. He was in a fine pressed custom suit with a small pair of glasses on his nose. He was Mu, the family butler or head butler rather, and one of Momo's trainers. "She indeed has, Mu. I worry for the next part, the one-on-one tournament." Mu chuckled. "I don't see the reason. Young Ms. Momo is perfectly capable of going toe-to-toe with any of these young heroes. After all, she's a walking armory." He finished with a grin. VIP section. Maruko looked down with a growl. Okay, what am I missing? Midoriya didn't even fight back when Matchstick Jr. got close. That was far from the fight she wanted. Ryukyu hummed in thought. It would seem he saw something that threw him off, maybe? Getting caught up in one's head isn't new or anything. Better to get such a thing out of his system in training than in the field, she said before taking a sip of her water. All Might agreed with the dragon woman. That is most likely correct. Young Midoriya is the type of hyperfixate and overthink situations. That being said, he thrives in combat, so we'll see him cut loose soon. Endeavor and Ray looked down at their son, both proud that he managed to come first. Ray, however, was worried about the turn of events. She didn't take her eyes off her son the whole time and saw his face when he charged the Midoriya boy. Her son was slowly losing himself to his anger and pain. She wasn't even sure what drove him anymore. Endeavor squeezed her shoulder and she nodded. Now wasn't the time to think about family issues, they were in public, and appearances needed to be maintained. She stood up to see if she could talk to her son before the finals, Endeavor watching her go with a frown. After the final 16 were announced, Izuku walked off to think. He needed to get his mind right before the finals, otherwise he was going to lose. Right as he turned to walk down one of the tunnels, he was met with his bicolored classmate, his hand still clenched around the 10 million point headband. Midoriya, he said with a frown. We need to talk. Izuku looked at him for a moment before sighing. Yeah, I'm thinking we do. Todoroki glared at him for a second before closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. Why? How was it I was able to take this headband? Izuku looked away. Something in your eyes threw me off. This whole time I thought pride drove you, that my beating of your ice was the force pushing you. But if anything, you looked sad, you looked worried about something, and it shocked me enough to lose focus. I don't have pride, Todoroki said with a frown. I thought I did for a while, but I ended up being wrong about a lot of things. Izuku waited for Todoroki to continue because he was too curious not to know what was going on in the monotone boy's head. Tell me, do you know what quirk marriages are? Izuku's eyes widened. That's right, my father's fire and my mother's ice. I'm the perfect combination. My family has many problems, from my father's obsession in surpassing All Might to my mother having a mental breakdown, and seeing only my father in my left side to the point she threw boiling water at me, he said while gesturing to his scar. What? Muttered Izuku. I thought my mother was a prisoner due to my father's fortune buying her hand for a quirk marriage. But I was wrong, he shouted, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise, having for the first time hearing emotion in Todoroki's voice. She wasn't a victim of his greed. They worked together. She was just as obsessed with success as him. It wasn't till my oldest brother died that she stopped being so obsessed with image and success. I dedicated my life to being a hero that surpassed my father with just my mother's eyes to spite him and to honor her. That if I showed him that I didn't need his fire to be number one, then he would feel like even more of a failure. Then she comes back, the doctors say she's recovered enough to see my father, and they actually reconcile. Todoroki said, fuming. Now I don't know what's going on. Why would she come back to that house with my father? Why come back to a place that caused her such duress that she had a breakdown, causing her to scar my face? Todoroki's eyes shined with emotion. Izuku was sure that he was barely keeping himself together. Because if it wasn't my father that was pushing her, if it wasn't his obsession that I didn't know she shared, what if it was me? He whispered while looking at the floor. His voice became soft as he continued. I wasn't the best at the beginning. It took me a while to use my mother's ice while I took to the fire quicker. What if she was angry at my progress rather than my father? What if it was because I wasn't good enough? That's why I couldn't accept it at the battle trials. That's why I need to use her ice. I need her to know that I'm good enough. Todoroki said quietly, finally finished and was trying to catch his breath. Izuku felt his heart break at those words. This was far from what he thought this conversation would be about. He would also bet that Todoroki didn't plan to share all of that, and as soon as he started, the rest spilled out until he was done. I don't know your family, started Izuku, but I have seen obnoxious and aggressive mothers, he said as he thought of his Aunt Mitsuki. Business-focused and successful mothers, he said while thinking of Nanao Yaoyorosa. Soft and nurturing mothers, he said while thinking of his own. But I know that all of them would kill for their children, and while they may not show it every day, that won't change. So if your mother spent years in a ward recovering from a mental break to come home, then I think she did it for you. Todoroki's eyes misted as he glared at the ground. Then why won't she even look at me? No matter what I do, why is it whenever I look to her, she's looking away? Izuku placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I don't know. But maybe you need to have a talk with her like this. For as long as you let yourself jump to conclusions, then the worse they'll be. Tell you what, Izuku said loudly with a grin. Not bragging when I say I'm the one to beat here. So if you put up a decent fight against me, then I'm sure it'll be a good conversation starter. Todoroki snorted. You're on Midoriya. Izuku leaned forward. Do my eyes deceive me? Or are you sporting a small smile? I'm leaving, said Todoroki as he walked off with a twitching mouth. Izuku sighed before walking off in his own direction. Neither boys going down another tunnel path where around the corner was a white-haired woman who came to speak to her son before the finals, who came to encourage him and just be around him for a moment. Neither boys noticed that she had slid down the wall as she listened on in horror. Neither boys noticed that she was silently sobbing into her hands by the end of it. Neither boys noticed Rei Todoroki finally learning what she did to her son. Chapter 14. With the second round out of the way, Izuku grinned. It was time for the tournament. Looking around at his class, he knew that he was in for a fun couple of fights. He didn't expect to see too much that would stump him, but he was excited to see what they had in store for the competition. He tried not to think too much about what Todoroki said and the mess of emotions he turned out to be. What Izuku thought was a prideful if slightly emo teen, turned out to be a broken boy who was lost and trying to come to grips with his broken home. Looking over to the corner that Todoroki was standing in, he frowned. The boy wasn't showing any emotion on his face, but the blank stare into the arena was telling enough that his mind was not here but rather in some sort of memory. Izuku! Ready to kick some serious butt! Shouted Uraraka while rushing over to him with a megawatt grin on her face. I met some cool 1B Hero students and teamed up with them. They're pretty strong. Who do you think is gonna go first? Izuku smiled at his friend. She was just too bright to let him stay in his funk. I'm not sure they're about to announce the lineup. Who do you want to face? I saw that your quirk has substantially improved. Uraraka's head nodded up and down rapidly. Yep. Aizawa-sensei was the one to discover that my quirk may have other uses to it. It's actually really easy to make things heavier, just have to push instead of pull with my quirk. Well, not really push, or maybe it's add. She tilted her head in thought, looking like she slightly confused herself. Okay, explaining what I'm doing is tough, but I have gotten the hang of it. Well, great work. I knew your quirk had incredible potential with just the removing of gravity aspect. Now you can go the other way, Izuku said, giving her a pat on the shoulder. Not just you, but everyone seems to have been putting in a lot of work in their training since the battle trials. An arm wrapped around Izuku's shoulder, and a small tingle of electricity told him who it was. Duh, said Kaminari with a smirk. You think you're the only one training and improving your quirk whenever you can? That's pretty presumptuous of you. Izuku pushed the arm off of him. Not what I meant, I just didn't expect so much improvement. I'm happy about it. This would be a walk in the park for me if none of you improved, he said with a smirk. Izuku made to walk off before turning to Kaminari with a savage grin. Also thank you, Kaminari. The boy gave him a confused look before shrugging it off. As Izuku walked away, his phone began to buzz. He received a text message. Mr. Midoriya, the facility is up and running to your specifications. Designation Olympus is fully operational. When can I expect your arrival? Izuku's already excited feeling grew tenfold at the news. He actually gotten the idea from his mother, and with his father's connections, made a few calls to set up something of a base of operations. Or rather a bunker or more hideout. No, it was his Hero HQ, completely off the grid, and only 3 living beings knew its location. His father, the head contractor, and himself. I will be by tomorrow. I have the sports festival today. Great work, I'll transfer a bonus for the quick completion. Everyone! Let's get those eyes to the monitors! President Mick's voice screamed through the loud system, getting the attention of everyone in a several-mile radii. Here's the lineup for the finals. Midoriya Izuku vs Tetsu. Ashido Mina vs Yaoyorozu Momo. Itsuka Kendo vs Kaminari Denki. Tenya Ida vs Meihatsum. Todoroki Shoto vs Hanta Siro. Ochako Uraraka vs Tokoemi Fumikage. Kirishima Aijiro vs Bakugo Katsuki. Sato Rikido vs Kyoka Jiro. There you have it! The lineup for the finals for UA's first years. Any thoughts, Aizawa? Seems pretty random. Indeed, it was. Gave everyone a number and threw them into a number generator on Google. Seems lazy. Well, that's how we've always done it. First round is in 10 minutes. Fighters go to your waiting rooms, the rest of you go to the stands. Well, at least I don't have to wait to go, thought Izuku with a determined smile. Inko rubbed her hands worriedly. I know Izuku is strong, but knowing he's going to have to fight is making me really nervous. Mitsuki rubbed her friend's shoulder. Yeah, but with that quirk of his I don't really know what can take him down. I mean, he has something for everything, right? I think so, he's spent years coming up with ways to use his quirk. I just can't help but worry, Inko said with a sigh. I understand, Mitsuki said with a frown. I may not show it, but I spend most of my time worrying about my brat. I don't know if you've noticed, but he's got a bit of my personality dash. Inko looked at the woman blandly, a bit. So, I always worry about him being taken too seriously with what he says. He doesn't want people to really die when he yells that or that he'll actually kill someone. It's just his overly expressive personality, and I don't want people to see that and assume he's some monster or junior villain. She said softly as she looked down at Bakugo walking to his spot in the stands with a determined look on his face before shouting at a classmate who tried to talk to him. Mitsuki laughed, suddenly surprising Inko, then looked at her with a grin. That doesn't mean he can't be a loud little asshole, she said while laughing. Inko rubbed the back of her head as some of the people around them looked at the laughing woman a bit nervously. If Endeavor noticed the change in his wife as she sat down after coming back, he didn't mention it. She didn't look like she wanted his comfort right now, nor did he think he deserved the chance to comfort her. But looking at the haunted, broken look in her eye made him feel like the lowest form of scum, and he didn't even know what caused it. All he could do was lean closer to her and make his flames a bit hotter to provide a bit of warmth. Not much, but he hoped it offered something for her. Miruko looked over the names with a grin. First match has the Wonder Beam Midoriya and Stainless Steel Tetsu. Should be a fun one. Wonder how the greenie will get through the defense of Tetsu? Hawks crunched on popcorn before looking over at her. I'm sure it will be in an unexpected way. Any bets? He said, looking at the room with a smile. Endeavor looked over at the Birdman. My son will be in the finals at the least. I meant on this fight, you overly doting helicopter parent, Hawks said with a flat look on his face. He was awarded with a snort from the man and a bark of laughter from Miruko. Ryukyu hummed. I believe Midoriya has this match. I don't quite understand his quirk, but so far he seems to be unfazed by everything, she said while looking at the green-haired boy intently. He is steadfast and capable, added Edgeshot with a nod. Tetsu hasn't shown much in the rounds leading to this, so I will not count him out completely. Endeavor gazed down to the arena. The crowd was cheering as the two boys were slowing walking out of their respective tunnels. He knew about Midoriya, had heard rumors from contacts in the HPSC that the boy was a person of interest for them. Additionally, he was the son of a friend of his Hisashi. Midoriya Hisashi, genius of a man with connections all over the planet. Years ago, when he was starting to overheat every time he used his quirk, he sought the man out for help on the advice of a colleague. Turns out after decades of training, his quirk was actually evolving. Thanks to the man and his resources, he was able to not only get better but improve, and here he was, the number 2 hero. So, he knows that the son of that man was more than meets the eye. Midoriya will win, said Endeavor firmly. Miruko perked up at that. Oh ho! Something must stick out to you about the kid! Her foot tapped the ground rapidly in anticipation. All Might silently listened to his fellow heroes talk about the outcome of this fight with a soft smile. It was nice to just be a part of the group. This is your time, young Midoriya. Your speech was a perfect setup, now it's time to show the world that you are here, thought All Might with his grin become larger. Izuku walked forward, slowly ascending the stairs to the concrete platform, while across him Tetsu did the same with a determined frown on his face. Looking to his left, he saw Midnight squirming on her referee stand, no doubt thinking something perverted. I'm excited to face you, Izuku called out. For some reason at his words the crowd quieted down to try and listen. Your defense is some of the best in the year, though Kurashima is in the same boat, I think. Tetsu groaned. You don't know how annoying it is for one of your 1A guys to have such a similar quirk. I was hoping to fight him to prove I'm the better one. But I'll settle for you, the golden boy of the first years, he shouted as he smashed his metal fists together, getting a loud clang sound to reverberate throughout the arena. Izuku grinned and slammed his fists together, having hardened his arms similarly to Kurashima, getting a loud crack to sound through the arena. It took about a second for the crowd to roar their approval of the two and Midnight to shout her appreciation, all the while her hips did a wiggle. Izuku really tried not to focus on Tetsu was blushing but managed to tear his eyes away. "Start!" shouted Midnight, and Izuku shot forward with a grin. Tetsu's quirk allowed him to cover his body in metal, the type was unknown, and any further abilities were unknown as well. Izuku could hit him with a knockout gas, blast him off the arena, or do any other sort of quick win, but he wanted to show off. He shot a right jab forward at the metal man, who was far too slow to dodge and just took the attack. Izuku winced at the pain of effectively punching a steel wall but continued on. Tetsu threw a two-punch combination that Izuku weaved around, then slid an uppercut into his chin. Momentarily dazed from the hit, Tetsu was unable to avoid the double palm strike to his chest that caused another gong-like sound to overtake the cheers of the arena. Tetsu was launched a dozen feet back from the force of the hit and rubbed his chest in pain. It didn't hurt too bad, but he was feeling a dull ache from the hit. Not staying on the defense any longer, Tetsu waited until Izuku was almost upon him before punching the ground as hard as he could, creating a meter-wide crack in the concrete arena that forced Izuku to stop his rush or risk falling over. With a battle cry, Tetsu ran and tackled Izuku off of his feet. Izuku chuckled as he crashed into the ground under the wrecking ball-like force of Tetsu. With moves and experience from hundreds of ass-kickings from the fight dojo, Izuku reversed the tackle and kicked his opponent off of him before getting back to his feet. "That was good," Izuku said with a smile, looking no worse for wear despite taking a hit that would smash a car. Jumping into the air, Izuku reared back and decided to really show off. His strength was greater than the average enhancer, time to prove it. Tetsu only managed to open his eyes in time to see Izuku descending on top of him before punching his stomach. While Tetsu was able to create a meter-wide crack in the arena, Izuku's hit completely shattered the entire concrete ground, with cracks spreading to the stadium seating and shaking the ground from the force. Izuku jumped off his opponent and landed on the uneven footing of the completely ruined stadium arena as he watched the dust and smoke billow out from the point of impact. "That was me putting my back into it. You still awake, Tetsu?" he called out with a laugh. "This was too much fun." "That was pure muscle. Next time he'll add his quirk." Maruko wiggled in her seat as her foot continued to hammer into the ground. "Holy shit," she said with a grin that could only be described as feral. "I want him. I want him right now," she declared. "He's a minor," Hawk said with a deadpan expression. Maruko threw a carrot at the Birdman with a glare. "Not like that, you dumbass. I want to fight him. He's really got spunk. Maybe in a few years the other way if he continues to be as awesome as he is, though," she added with a wave. Endeavor stood and gazed out onto the completely shattered arena with a frown. "This boy, what is his quirk? There are heroes with strength quirks that couldn't do that," he said while gazing over at All Might. Said man was smiling fondly at Midoriya. "He didn't use a quirk to do that," All Might said with a grin. "That was pure muscle. His quirk allowed him to achieve that level of power, though." "Enough beating around the bush, All Might," Ryukyu chimed in with a glare at the number one. "Just what is his quirk? Answer the question." Her right eye that was looking at the number one took on a sharper look as her iris started to slowly morph. Hawks flew over to the number one and with wide eyes whispered at full volume. "Better answer the queen over there. She's not one to make cranky," he said with a chuckle. All Might sighed. "Very well, young Midoriya can manipulate matter. You saw the result of him altering and enhancing his own body." Endeavor turned away from the number one and continued to look down at the arena. "That was quite the quirk, but it must have quite the drawback. Just what is your son capable of, Hisashi?" As the dust cloud cleared, Tetsu slowly got to his feet, much to the approval of the crowd. "And the Iron Man himself has persevered. Just what are they feeding that boy?" announced President Mike. "His defenses are top-notch. No surprise he's still standing, but I'd be shocked if he wasn't feeling it by now," replied Aizawa. Izuku nodded in agreement with his teacher. "You're a tough cookie, I'll give you that. I'll start using my quirk now," Izuku said with a cheer, much to the visible shock of Tetsu and surprise of the crowd. "Bring it on, you bastard!" shouted Tetsu. Slowly the broken ground, large rocks that used to be a solid ground, were mended and put back together. Izuku hummed as he slowly spread his power outward, focusing on a small spot and rapidly fixing it, then moving on. His mind was able to focus on hundreds of things at once, hence being able to create from nothing. So he rapidly fixed 5 kilograms of the arena over and over, making it looking like one action when it was in fact hundreds. Just a minute later and the arena was repaired. Much couldn't be said for the ground around the arena floor leading to the stadium seating. Not bad, huh? Izuku said with his arms wide, gesturing the fixed arena. Now we can continue. Izuku, like a cannon, shot forward at his opponent. Tetsu hardened his arms and came out swinging. Knowing that he would need to really hit Tetsu, Izuku increased his speed with air streams and started creating a substance on his right arm. As they neared, Izuku stopped hard on his left foot and with all his strength and momentum slammed his right fist into Tetsu's chest, creating a shockwave of air from the impact. Tetsu was blasted backwards at incredible speed, but from Izuku's arm and fist a dark substance stuck to his chest at the point of impact and kept Tetsu tethered to Izuku. Continuing his momentum, Izuku started to spin Tetsu around in a circle over and over again, fast and faster, almost turning him into a blur. The 1B student was heard yelling at Izuku as he was spun rapidly. This substance was inspired by a show I watched as a kid. It has all the properties of rubber and gum. Izuku thought happily, time for the finale. Thanks for letting me show off, you unbreakable punching bag. Izuku started spinning Tetsu into the air until he was level with the roof of the arena. Izuku grit his teeth and strained every muscle in his body. 5 air streams appeared on Tetsu's back and barely noticeable to anyone. Izuku's right arm had a small spark for an instant just before he brought Tetsu down. With a roar and a flex of all his strength, Izuku pulled Tetsu down, the 5 air streams drastically increasing the speed of the descent. The crowd held their breath as the metal man impacted the ground with enough force to shake the entire arena and cause a shockwave to knock everyone into their seats. Midnight in her stand barely held on from the force of the winds. The entire arena floor was destroyed once again, but this time to an even greater extent than the last time. When the smoke and dust cleared, Izuku was seen hunching over a large and deep crater, taking slow breaths. The bottom of the crater couldn't be seen. It was deep enough to completely obscure Tetsu. Cementos retrieved the unconscious Tetsu from the bottom with a pillar of concrete. Midnight raised her arm. Winner, Midoriya Izuku! Ryukyu, who had stood to her feet during the final attack by Midoriya, sighed happily. What power! Not to mention utilizing his quirk in such a way. I simply must have him. Her regal look and demeanor took on a darker look as she gazed into the arena. Hawks looked at the woman with a sigh. He knew better than to tease the dragon woman like he did Miruko. The woman was prouder than any he'd ever met. Maybe it was the draconic instincts or something, but she was a fearsome woman that he didn't have the energy to openly mock. Oh! Into younger men now, Ryukyu! Shouted Miruko with a laugh. Seems Miruko was perfectly fine with it. Though he certainly knows how to put on a show! Exclaimed the rabbit-themed hero. Ryukyu didn't bother turning her head to look at Miruko. I am interested in strength and potential. My darling Nijire was right, Midoriya was someone to look out for. Endeavor ignored them as he leaned back down into his chair. He didn't feel as impressed as the others. It was a great finisher and would certainly qualify as a super move, but he has seen better. He was far more impressed by the boy's ability to multitask while fighting, to use so many aspects of his quirks simultaneously. What do you think, Rei? He asked lowly. Rei looked at her husband for a moment before turning back to the arena. He has talent. I believe he would give Shoto trouble. You're right, agreed Endeavor. We've seen him neutralize his ice quite simply in the last 2 rounds. If Shoto doesn't use his fire, then he will lose quite handedly. Rei shuddered in her seat. I need to tell you something. Shoto dash. She was cut off as Miruko flew past them into the wall, courtesy of Ryukyu, whose right arm had a draconic transformation. Enough of your crass innuendo, the dragon hero said with grit teeth. Miruko jumped to her feet and stretched her arm out. Oh, is the lady lizard getting heated? She was ready to pounce when All Might made himself known. The massive wall of muscle blurred between the two of them, with no one being able to really follow his movements. Let's calm down, everyone, we have many more matches to watch. Izuku sat next to Ida and Uraraka as Momo and Mina walked into the arena. Who do you think will win, guys? Izuku asked his friends. Uraraka placed her finger to her chin and thought. Well, Yamamo can make pretty much anything to help her with her quirk, but Mina should be able to melt anything she makes with her acid, so I'm not sure. Ida moved to disagree. Yaoyorozu has shown to be able to create long-range weapons with her quirk, so I think she will emerge victorious. Mina has the close distance while Yaoyorozu does not. Izuku had to agree. I think you're right. He turned to the right of him with Kaminari was trying and failing to make Jiro pay attention to him. What do you think, Sparky? Giving it to Momo? He called without turning to look at him. Bakugo walked up next to Izuku while keeping his eyes on the arena. If Pinky can close distance quirk enough, it's her win. If she's too slow, Ponytail wins, he said with his arms crossed. I think you're right, Izuku said with a nod. As soon as the fight began, Momo did the unexpected and rushed forward to meet Mina in the middle of the arena. Mina looked surprised, but as this worked for her, she didn't mind too much. Momo's thoughts were to preserve as much of her bigger and more intricate devices for later. She didn't want to waste lipids until the later fights. Take this, Yamamoto! She pushed her arms together. Super move! Acid rain! From both palms a wide stream of acid flew into the air in a wide arc. Momo frowned, then winced in pain as the first drop hit her skin, followed by countless more. The pain was incredible. Momo had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Not to mention the fact that much of her outer layer of clothes were being destroyed, in front of an international broadcast. Focusing on her quirk, she created a flash bang and tossed it directly at Mina. Sorry about that, muttered Momo. Lashing out with a kick, Mina was knocked to the ground but quickly sprung back up. The two closed distance and began trading viscous attacks back and forth. A punch or a kick. Momo grabbed Mina's jacket and threw her over her shoulder, tearing it off of her before tossing it aside. Mina did more acid rain, destroying parts of Momo's tank top and pants before giving her a high kick to the face, dazing the heiress. Grunting in pain, Momo created another flash bang and tossed it up while creating eye and ear protection. Mina quickly looked away but was still stunned momentarily and was tackled off her feet by Momo. Now on the ground, Momo created a taser and stunned the acid girl even more. Mina shouted in pain but created highly corrosive acid at the point of impact, destroying the taser, then using her core, spun and flipped the two of them over, trying to pin Momo to the ground. Momo brought her leg up to kick Mina off of her, but it was caught by Mina, and she was slammed into the ground. Both in quite a bit of pain and panting, just noticed that the crowd was silent. Izuku and Kaminari, hell, all the boys, were watching with extremely wide eyes as the two girls fought. They didn't know what to expect from this battle, but clothes being torn off and wrestling on the ground wasn't going to be their first guess. This is hot, said a drooling Mineta before being whacked by Tsu's tongue. Yes, is it? Thought most of the boys in agreement. Jiro glanced at Kaminari. You're just as much of a pervert as Mineta, aren't you? She accused softly with a slight frown. That snapped him out of it. No! I just didn't expect it is all. I mean, he said quickly before trailing off. Izuku nodded. I mean, who expects two girls to start destroying each other's clothes before wrestling on the ground in front of everyone? He muttered, trying to calm his blush down. Uraraka jumped over to them. They're fighting really hard right now, though. Did you see that kick from Mina? She shouted, hyped. Hagakure waved her invisible arms rapidly. Yeah. And Momo's flash bang and taser, she added excitedly. Nope, didn't notice. The boys thought, still dazed. Ida jumped in front of the class. Everyone, it is shameful to subject our classmates to such shameful thoughts. We must treat them with respect, he declared, impassioned. Ciro raised an eyebrow at him. Your face is the reddest here, buddy. Ida quick sat back down while adjusting his glasses. Mina grinned down at Momo, their faces nose to nose. You know, I think I realize the position we're in, she said while eyeing Momo's leg over her shoulder as she pinned the heiress to the ground. I wouldn't mind rolling around with you in the future, but I think we're getting the wrong kind of attention right now. She laughed. Momo, face atomic red, reacted on instinct. Her quirk flared and created an air cannon from her chest that blasted Mina off of her. Getting to her feet quickly, she created some sturdier clothes that would stand up better to the acid. Mina slid forward on her acid and created more in her hands as she closed distance. Momo, seeing the plan, activated her own quirk and created a shield made of plastic and ran forward. The acid was blocked by the shield and Mina was once again taken off her feet by a shield bash to the face. Momo quickly shot a net at her from a launcher she created. Mina tried to escape the net, but Momo managed to throw her out of bounds in time. Momo let out a breath. That was more than I wanted to expend, but it was a good showing for both of us, she said while moving over to help Mina out of the net. Mina signed. Yeah, but losing isn't ever fun, she said as she stood up and stretched before looking at Momo over her shoulder with a sly grin. Let me know if you want to roll around again, Momo. Momo's face went atomic red again as she became aware of all the eyes on her. Goodness. Chapter 15. Izuku sat back in the stadium bench as he waited for the next match. Momo and Mina should be arriving soon. The crowd was going nuts for the two girls, even if it wasn't for the best reasons. Izuku had to wince, he wasn't much better than the crowd on this one. Both of them are very pretty, and they didn't exactly leave much to the imagination with their fight. Bakugo took a seat next to him where Kaminari was previously. "What do you think for this fight, nerd?" he asked as he glared at the arena. The visible signs of Izuku's fight were still present in the area around the concrete arena and near the wall leading to the stands. Izuku tilted his head. "Kaminari is a great fighter, he has a lot of experience from our dojo. Not to mention he's really come into his own with his quirk. I honestly don't think Kendo has a chance here." Bakugo grunted, but before he could speak a voice from the wall next to them spoke up. "Oh ho! So you 1A chumps are so arrogant that you think we don't even stand a chance against you? You idiots are going to regret it." A head of blonde was seen near the wall separating classes 1A and 1B. Izuku looked over at the boy. He had a manic look in his eyes, but Bakugo spoke up. "You Class B losers aren't a challenge to us," he said with a red eye glaring at the boy. "I seem to remember none of you managing to keep a headband without our class helping." Bakugo pointed over to Uraraka, who squeaked at the attention, and Jiro, who just sighed. "Round face and earlobes must have carried your classmates." The manic look in the blonde's eyes went away and a cold look came upon them. It would seem that he was playing it up, but Bakugo's words struck a nerve. Izuku had to shake his head. He honestly didn't know who that was, though he was sure that Bakugo just made a troublesome enemy. "That's not true!" shouted Uraraka while waving her arms at Bakugo. "They're really good! Don't be so mean!" she said with a glare at the explosion boy. Jiro reached over to pat the girl's shoulder. "Don't worry about it, this is gonna be some macho stuff now. Doubt we'll come up anymore." True to her assessment, Bakugo and the blonde continued to glare at each other. Izuku turned away with an eye roll and noticed Mina and Momo walking up with a new set of gym clothes and sheepish smiles. "Momo! Mina!" Izuku called with a wide smile, getting everyone's attention on the two of them. "Great fight!" The two girls were swarmed, but it quickly died down when Kaminari and Kendo stepped out onto the arena. Momo and Mina sat directly behind Izuku, Bakugo, and Uraraka. Izuku leaned back to look at the creation girl. "Why didn't you use some of the stuff we saw in the first two events?" "I have to be careful not to use all my resources in the first fight," she answered while rubbing her arm, likely from the phantom pains of the acid rain. Mina looked over with a small wince. "I didn't get a chance to tell you, good fight earlier." Izuku gave her a wide smile in return before looking down at the arena. Kaminari inhaled deeply. I don't like it. I don't like attacking girls, but I know better than to hold back here," he muttered to himself. The announcements began. "On one side we have the resident spark plug from 1A. On the other we have the fist of fury of 1B. What do you expect to come, unbiased teacher of class 1A?" "I would never be biased, this fight will end quickly," Aizawa answered in a monotone that seemed to exasperate everyone in earshot. "There you have it! Take it away, Midnight! Are both combatants ready? Great fight!" she shouted with a crack of her whip. Kaminari didn't want to be that guy. This wasn't a fight to establish the strongest hero student. Hell, he was sure there were some serious powerhouses that didn't even get to shine because of the types of events that were leading up to now. That being said, to show his stuff, he'll have to really show off. That means that the girl in front of him likely won't have a chance to do the same. It was unfortunate for her, but such is life. Kaminari's body had a golden glow to it as small arcs of electricity sparked off of him. He took a sprinter's stance and shot forward. Super move, thunder flash, he thought. To the ones in the crowd without the awareness to keep up, it was like a golden streak that blitzed forward right at Kendo. It was like a stream of lightning, and it sounded like a taser going off right in their ears. Kendo knew she had to act fast before the fight began, so as soon as Midnight yelled start, she made her fist as big as possible and punched forward with all her strength. Her only hopes were that he couldn't course correct easily. That's when Kaminari's true skill was made known. The gold streak zigzagged around Kendo and impacted her in the right flank, taking her off her feet and launching her off of the arena out of bounds. In the time it would take to open a bag of chips, the fight began and ended. The crowd could barely comprehend it before a roar of applause sounded throughout the stadium. Hawks was rarely impressed with students, well, their abilities at least. but even he had to admit that the kid was impressive. "He's a quick one," he said with a nod of his head. "His reaction speed is impressive as well, to be able to course correct the instant her fist was in his way," added Deadshot. "The boy has potential so rarely seen, his upper limits aren't clear as well. Shame the girl didn't have the opportunity to show her abilities." Miruko agreed. "It's a shame, but we know what her quirk is, so I'm sure that everyone else does too. She did the best she could. Overwhelming speed is hard to overcome. I will extend the boy an offer if he continues to impress," commented Deadshot. Ryukyu shook her head. "I wish I could have seen more from the girl." "Shame," she said with a sigh. Endeavor stayed silent. There wasn't much he could offer to someone like Kaminari Denki. The boy's quirk seemed to be an internal manipulation emitter type, which was the opposite of his Hell Flame quirk. The girl, Kendo Itsuka, seemed to have been given the short straw, but he was sure some of the brawling heroes would throw her an offer based on round 2. Izuku could only shake his head after the showing from Mei and Ida. After 20 minutes of showing her inventions and tech, it would seem that young Hatsum stepped right off the arena, knocking herself out of the tournament. Thoughts, Eraserhead? She accomplished her goal in this festival, showing her inventions and proving their ability. I will say that I would feel embarrassed in his shoes, however. Izuku reached over to pat the shaking Ida. "Sorry, buddy, but at least you're completely fresh for round 2, he said, trying to lighten the mood. "I was used as an advertisement." "The shame." Izuku laughed a bit. "I think that says more about her than you. She was going to do that regardless. Now you have more fights to show your stuff." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "In fact, she could have won it, and you would have been in a really bad spot." Ida deflated at that. "You're right, as usual," he said begrudgingly. "Thank you, Midoriya. I won't let the next fight go to waste." "That's the spirit. You're against Sparky too. Should be a good one," Izuku said with a smile. He was about to continue when he heard Midnight shout, "Fight!" Izuku turned to the arena quickly. He must have not been paying attention as both Shiro and Todoroki were about to start. "Well?" Izuku sighed and watched as his breath steamed over. The entire stadium must have dropped several dozen degrees. Looking up at the absolute metric ton of ice, he had to admit, he wouldn't be able to vaporize that much, or rather vaporize it fast enough to overcome the sheer magnitude of ice. It would seem that Todoroki was able to produce exponentially faster than before. Well, it seems that Todoroki has won this one. He needs to relax," Aizawa said with a groan. "Well then I guess it's my turn now," Uraraka said with a smile. "Wish me luck, everyone," she said before running off. Izuku was about to offer some advice, but she was already gone. "This should be an interesting fight," he commented lowly. Bakugo next to him huffed. "If Round Face can make contact, she wins. However, Bird Face is a bad matchup since he's a mid-long-range fighter. So, then it comes down to Dark Shadow and whether or not it'll be affected by the gravity alterations of Uraraka's quirk," finished Izuku. Uraraka made it out of the tunnel with a face of supreme determination, Izuku noticed. Tokoyami, on the other hand, well, for a bird he looked ready. "Fight!" Tokoyami and Dark Shadow took the initiative. Uraraka crouched low and cracked the ground beneath herself. Izuku supposed it was the inverse ability she and Aizawa developed. The moment Dark Shadow made it within several feet of her, she blasted off, cratering the ground and shooting forth with tremendous speed. Then she seemed to blur before slamming into Dark Shadow, smashing into it, and slamming into Tokoyami behind it. Izuku narrowed his eyes. She made herself heavier, jumped, lightened herself, then right before impact increased again. "That's a lot of mental focus for someone," he commented. He knew how taxing a quirk with multiple switches were. He had countless, and most had just one. Bakugo next to him grunted. "She's not going to be able to keep this up. Round Face is too used to the other way, in fact dash." And a queasy Uraraka was gently dropped out of the ring by a bruised and groaning Tokoyami and Dark Shadow, announced Present Mike. "Yeah, that's about right," finished Bakugo with a smug look directed at Izuku before looking at the field. "Don't go to a tournament fight with a brand new ability, you moron," he growled quietly. "Ah, you do care." "Shut the fuck up, Deku. It's okay, I'm telling you, you did fantastic for such a new ability and in a high-stress situation," Izuku said to a gloomy Uraraka who was sinking in her stadium chair. "MMHMMHHHMHM," she mumbled into her paper bag. Izuku shook his head. "No one will say that." "MMHMMHHHMMH?" Izuku nodded. I know it if they do. I'll kick their ass. Thank you, she mumbled. No problem, smiled Izuku before looking down towards the arena. His childhood friend, now rival, was facing off against the class's tank. Actually, now that he thought about it, he and Bakugo have identical opponents. They were practically copies. In fact, if Bakugo noticed that, he'll likely fight. Izuku rubbed his forehead. If his fight was damaging to the arena, then Bakugo's was cataclysmic. Massive bombs destroying the ground faster than Cementos could fix it. The arena was shaking wildly. Heroes in the stands were helping the civilians brace from the blasts. It would have been cool if Bakugo wasn't shouting the whole time. Let's see Deku beat this, as he blasts Kirishima 10 meters deep into the ground with a double palm slam bomb. Continuous attacks that ruined the field, followed by what could only be called a tornado of TNT. Izuku made a cone of dense air in front of him to protect from the shockwave and dust that followed. He really needs to chill, Izuku said. He used his quirk to remove the dust off of his classmates. Tenya chopped at the air in front of himself. This is no way for a hero to operate in a public setting against a fellow student. I mean, even for a fight, this is a little far. Jiro stared at Tenya for a moment before saying, Are you actually surprised? That guy either needs medication or a girlfriend. The girls in the section were caught between scandalized looks and giggles at her comment. Izuku just sighed. They didn't know that Bakugo probably needed both. Well, Sato, Jiro, ready to rock and roll? Izuku asked with a grin. It was their fight, then his with Momo, and he couldn't wait. Sato slapped his chest with a grin while Jiro scratched her cheek. There you have it, folk, the final fight of the first round, shouted Present Mike. Feels like it's taken months. Good things take time, Eraserhead. You can't rush brilliance. Or mediocrity. That either. Now we have the rock star from hell versus the man with the craziest sugar rush in the world. Kyoka Jiro versus Sato Rikido, shouted Present Mike, getting cheers from the crowd. Izuku watched as Jiro slowly hiked herself up while Sato ate sugar cubes from his pocket. Jiro's quirk is very underrated, but super strength is a hell of a power. I think creativity will win it, muttered Izuku while glaring at the field. Bakugo pushed Tenya down the stand to sit next to Midoriya, getting an angry tirade from the glasses-wearing class president that was handily ignored. I give headphones the win. Sugar Rush has the raw power to knock anyone out, but he's as sharp as a circle. Shield dodge then blast, watch, Bakugo said with supreme confidence. Uraraka looked at him with bewildered eyes. Those are some names, Bakugo, she said lightly before tilting her head. Don't tell me you don't know their actual names, she shouted. When Bakugo continued to ignore her, Izuku took pity and patted her on the back and said, He likely doesn't even know yours. Don't take it personally. He was born obtuse. Much like Bakugo's prediction, Jiro expertly dodged around Sato before crouching and blasting the arena with her sound waves, destabilizing the ground, getting Sato to trip out of bounds. Overall, it wasn't the most impressive of fights, but it showed both of their quirks off to the pros, and at the end of the day, that was the entire point of the festival. All Might clapped from his chair as the first rounds came to a close. Truly, these young heroes are going to shine bright in the future. Makes old men like us excited. Right, Endeavor? The flame hero glared at his rival. Don't lump me in with you, I'm 45, not 60 like you, he growled. I'm not 60, I'm Dash. As interesting as you both are, anyone have any thoughts on the first round worth sharing? Interjected Hawks with a smile. I'll go first. I like Tokoemi. He has the theme I like, and his quirk seems to have a lot of potential. Ryukyu hummed as she gazed towards the winged hero. I believe that Midoriya and Uraraka have a tremendous amount of potential, but I don't believe I can really help him with his quirk. Yaoyorozu has a very large amount of potential, almost the most out of all of them, but her confidence needs work. I will be extending the two girls an offer. Boisterous laugh exploded from Miko. You think you have what it takes to train Gravity Girl? I feel bad that a big name will take her attention from a capable fighter that may offer her training. You think I can't train her? The Dragoness asked with a low tone. Oh, you mean train someone that needs to put thought into their quirk other than grow big, smash villain? Like you? Yeah, Mirko taunted with a grin. The two women continued to argue, so the rest of the room decided to ignore them. You'd think Ryukyu would realize that Mirko is just trying to goad her into fighting. I doubt that woman really cares about any of this, muttered Hawks with a sigh. Endeavor just snorted. That rabbit has never been anything more than crass in the years I've known her, and Ryukyu has a pride problem. Several, including his wife, just stared at him silently for a moment. I believe that Shoto has the most potential out of all of them, Midoriya included. He finished with a puffed-up chest he was trying not let show. Again, he didn't notice the looks directed in his direction from the others. I agree. Ray sighed quietly, mind still on the haunting realization from earlier. I do believe that Midoriya has potential that we don't really fathom considering the nigh-limitless potential of his quirk. I'll be interested in his future. Edgeshot glided forward. Kaminari is a great candidate for either myself or the Ingenium family training. He needs to sharpen his reflexes and agility to completely harness his potential. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the next fight ready for your viewing pleasure. Izuku, the master of the universe, against the goddess of creation herself, Momoja Yorozu. Relax, they're students, not demigod Mike. You truly are the worst hype man erasure. I'm in physical distress having to share the mic with you. Pretty sure that's why Niza had me here. Finished Aizawa, getting a moment of silence from the crowd and present Mike in response. Damn rat. Growled Endeavor. He was very familiar with the beast's mind games and glared at the speakers. Mind sharing with the class your issue with the principal? Asked Hawks. Endeavor glared at the winged hero before turning to the two students walking out onto the arena. No. Izuku cracked his neck and took a deep breath. This was his happy place, or rather it usually was. He loved testing himself and his abilities against a strong opponent. But right now, he found himself across from a friend. Momo stretched to ready herself, causing certain assets to become more pronounced, getting him to sweat a bit. A friend he may have a bit more than interest in testing his combat abilities against. Ignore that part of yourself and think, what does she have? Pondered Izuku. She can virtually create anything, so there is no use planning against a specific item, as the only thing she has shown to favor is a metal staff, which is just for close quarters combat. All I know is that she is crafty and has more offensive power under her belt than she's shown, and I need to be careful. Good luck, Yamamoto, he said while lowering himself. Her head shot up to look at him in surprise before responding. Thanks, you too. Midnight signaled for the fight to begin, and Izuku took initiative and shot forward at high speeds. Momo threw out metal pellets that exploded in an arc in front of her that stopped Izuku in his tracks. He cleared the smoke and saw that she had boots and gauntlets on her arms and legs. Okay, Izuku muttered before shooting a blast of compressed air at her. Momo clearly couldn't see the ball of air but knew it was approaching and pushed forward her right arm gauntlet that sparked with golden energy for a moment, which then blasted a beam of highly compressed heat and fire forward, igniting the air cannon and closing distance with Izuku. Izuku in turn raised his right arm and utilized Great Flame Commandment to catch the flames mid-air, similarly to what he did against the villain Pyro. It took a lot of concentration, which is why he was blasted off his feet by the next attack from Momo. Izuku's shirt, what was remaining of it, was on fire, and he quickly put it out with his good arm while mentally healing himself. He had several burns and a chunk of skin missing from the attack. To the astonishment of the crowd and Momo, who halted her attack after seeing the damage inflicted, Izuku stood up with no visible injury and a slowly growing grin. Why did you stop, Momo? That was a good opening, he said as he lowered himself. If those gauntlets are your secret weapons, then. Momo gasped as the circuitry was severed, causing her gear to spark and fall apart. I'm afraid you won't get much further than this. No, they aren't, said Momo with a determined glare. You should stop taking me so lightly. I only detonated half of them. Izuku tilted his head before looking down and seeing the rest of the metal pellets from before for an instant before they detonated right under and around him. He barely had the time to harden and protect himself as he was blown up. As the smoke cleared, Izuku, as Momo expected, stood up without injury but was looking at her with far more focus. It wasn't much, but the surprise attack gave her time to set up her actual plan. Two small toy-looking tanks were rolling around on her half of the arena, not going in any discernible pattern, while two toy helicopters did the same in the air. Momo was now covered in more armor, a chest and shoulder covering to accompany the gauntlet, and boots this time, while on her face she had a clear blue visor. Izuku looked at one of the tanks, and before he could sever it, one of the copters in the air shot a smaller beam at him. It seemed to be a smaller version of her gauntlet attack that moved far quicker but packed less of a punch. He was forced to jump to the side to dodge the attack, and as he was about to respond, the other tank shot a bigger beam from the ground, making him need to roll away. The pattern continued while Momo watched him from her side of the arena, clearly prepping her next move. One he really should have guessed from the earlier race. You've got to be kidding, Izuku growled as he dodged a beam while watching the incoming mini-missiles from her shoulder-mounted launcher. She's figured out his weakness, All Might said astonished. Hawks hummed. Seems the incredible mental focus his quirk takes makes it hard for him to have several variables to focus on and use his quirks simultaneously, he said while wondering how the boy will overcome this. Endeavor leaned forward in interest. He is young and lacks real experience. Time will train this weakness out of him. She has his number in this fight, he may lose. Izuku jumped as high as he could away from the missiles and created his sword. With all the power he could muster and some added air manipulation from his quirk, he swung on a wide arc. This caused the missiles to wobble and their flights to destabilize, causing them to impact into each other and detonate. With one threat mitigated, Izuku looked to the 4 very annoying little toys. With lightning-like speed, Izuku created a 5 kilograms amount of water, froze it, cleaved it into small pellets, and shot them at all the toys. All 4 bots shot their beams, causing most of the ice to be melted and evaporate midair, but they weren't unscathed as some ice managed to hit their mark. While not destroyed, this provided Izuku with enough time to land and shoot forward with his sword towards Momo. Momo wasn't idle as she shot forward with her rocket boots, meeting Izuku in the middle. Expecting him to destroy her boots, she had a tank shoot him to pull his attention away from her. Izuku expected this and adapted accordingly. Instead of dodging the attack or catching it like most would expect, he did what he did best when backed into a corner and improvised. With the sword in his hand, he swiped at the beam. Now normally that would just cause his blade to melt or become superheated and burn his hand, but Izuku coated the edge in water that he lowered to just above freezing. Momo's eyes widened as she realized the plan and pushed both gauntlets forward, but she wasn't faster than the energy beam that impacted the water blade. From the impact, a cloud of steam exploded out, covering the immediate area, hiding Izuku from sight. In the next instant, the 4 bots and Momo blasted the steam with energy blasts, but almost immediately after, the bots all blew up from having their internals shredded by Izuku. Izuku shot forward out of the steam and slashed his sword at Momo with all his strength. She put up her guard, but the combination of Izuku's strength, the sword, and Izuku enhancing the offensive power with air manipulation rendered her defense useless. Momo's armor was destroyed, and she was launched off the arena out of bounds with a dazed expression. The crowd roared at the amazing battle, and the audience began chattering about their thoughts on the fight. The entire fight lasted barely 90 seconds. Izuku frowned as he stared at the sword in his hand. Momo's strategy not only highlighted my weakness but her strategic strength and her offensive potential. Even after losing, I believe she may have ended up looking better out of the 2 of us. Well done, Momo. Guess I may have been looking down on you without realizing. President Mike announced his victory, and Izuku walked off the stage with thoughts swirling in his head. He had at some point written off the competition in this festival, and it could have costed him. He won't let it happen again. Chapter 16. Izuku stood in the hall after his fight with Momo to recenter himself. He clenched his fists and took deep breaths. That was closer than I would care to admit. Mostly due to the alternating attacks from different ranges. Not to mention, as soon as I looked at one toy, another would fire from a blind spot. That is a rather deadly strategy that I never would have guessed Momo would use. Izuku punched the wall, causing a massive web of cracks that were instantly fixed. It's my fault I started believing my hype from this stupid festival. After everything with the Noma monster, I managed to believe I was unbeatable here. These are not kids from Aldera, these are the creme of the crop. No one does it better than you. Izuku touched the wall and with alchemy turned the stone to sand, then glass, created perfect water, and cooled it for a drink. Another breath and he sent the glass to oblivion and walked towards the stairs leading to the stands. Kaminari is a known rival of mine, as is Bakugo. Shoto has more raw power than anyone here, and they are likely to be my next opponents. I cannot repeat this showing. Endeavor chugged a water before tossing the bottle to the recycling bin. Midoriya has untold potential, as does Yaoyorozu, and it was displayed. The girl entered with a very strong strategy and executed it to near perfection. However, the sheer versatility and adaptability of Midoriya allowed him to overcome that and pull a win. I do not believe that there will be many pros that do not extend them an offer, he said while rubbing his flame beard. Ray hummed next to him. Will you? No, Shoto is the best student here, he answered immediately. Hawks coughed up his soda at Endeavor's declaration. Putting aside Endeavor's unbiased opinion, I believe that I will not be sending offers to either. They don't mesh with my style, he said with a sigh. They were impressive. All Might nodded. Excellent breakdown, my friend, he said to Endeavor, who glared in the opposite direction with a frown. Young Hawks, I commend you for acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses. To know a good fit from a bad, As the number 3 hero, it is likely they would accept your offer due to your status hindering them from a better matchup. Hawks tried not to blush like a child while receiving praise from the greatest hero in history. Strange how so many of his feathers started to float around him. How so weird. This next bout will be of incredible interest to myself and the more speed-oriented heroes, Edshot said as he leaned forward while watching Kaminari and Ida walk out onto the arena floor. Mirko hopped over to the ninja with a grin and a lump on her head from the dragon woman's. I agree, Sparky has some moves and the engine boy has a lineage we all know of. If they impress me, I might grace them with a spar or two. I could think of no worse a disaster than 2 promising hero candidates crippled because you don't know what restraint is. Ryukyu snarked from her chair while her arms slowly morphed back to normal from the dragon state it was in to smack Mirko. Let us see how it goes, interjected All Might before the 2 women could continue their sniping once again. Kaminari walked toward Ida with a determined glare. Of all the people here, you are the one I hope to face. Ida nodded. I do not like the thought of singling out classmates, but I would have to agree, Kaminari. I too was hoping we would face each other today. This is too good a chance to show off just how powerful I am, Kaminari said before his body started to glow with a golden aura that sparked with yellow arcs of electricity. Ida took a runner's stance as his engine started to burn blue, and his face held nothing but the fiercest determination. Agreed. Midnight managed to utter the first syllable of begin before they blasted towards each other. Streaks of blue and gold clashed a dozen times in a matter of seconds, with the crowd mostly being unable to follow the actual fight. The better pros were able to see the trademark kicks from the Ida family being blocked and parried by Kaminari's brawl-like fighting style. Kaminari clenched his teeth and veins started appearing on his neck as he amped his quirk up further than ever before, approaching the output levels of his indiscriminate shock attack. Ida's legs began to burn bright white as he shifted into top gear and he utilized his maximum output. If before it was 2 streaks clashing over and over, now it was 2 streaks moving fast enough that the energy trails couldn't dissipate before the next happened. In a matter of 3 seconds, they clashed 27 times. The arena looked as if there was a crisscross of white and gold energy with small flares at each connection. It was when the gold streak dodged a clash and slammed into the white one on the side that Ida was thrown out of bounds onto the grass with smoking legs. Kaminari fell to a knee on the arena stage, gasping for air with frazzled hair. The entire fight lasted 31 seconds. The crowd had only managed to get their eyes to adjust to the fight before it was over, but that didn't stop the thunderous applause from shaking the stadium. Kaminari only hoped that his mom and Ryujin-sensei watched the fight and saw how far he's pushed his quirk in his training. Izuku stared at the arena with wide eyes and a slack jaw. He was completely blown away by his 2 classmates' speed. While still slower than Nanomu, it was nearly unheard of for people his age to be that fast. Bakugo sat next to him without his usual fuming glare. Class president is better than I thought. Kaminari is good, he muttered to himself. The fact that he knows and said Kaminari's name is proof that Bakugo considered the lightning user a rival. Izuku had to hold himself back from commenting such to his oldest friend. He didn't want to undo the growth Bakugo has just shown by saying someone's name. While the bar is so fucking low for him, how did we get here? Izuku thought to himself, but only sighed and moved on. Uraraka on the other side of Bakugo wiggled in her seat with starry eyes. Oh, that was amazing, they're so fast! Many of the others agreed. Jiro stared at the ground with wide eyes. Who would have thought? Izuku smirked at the rocker's reaction. It was no secret that she liked ribbing Kaminari about his accidental short-circuiting in training. Nor was it a secret of Lightning Boy's interest in her romantically. Hell, she turned him down for dates almost every day. It was actually quite entertaining. That gave him an idea. Way to go, Kaminari! Shouted Izuku before sitting back down. I know he'll get a lot more attention from girls after a showing like that. I'll have to make sure he doesn't get in over his head at the beach this weekend, he said just loud enough to be heard on his row. The small body twitch from Jiro was only noticeable cause he was observing her with his quirk. Maybe you have a shot after all, Kaminari, he thought with a grin. Down on the field, both speedsters were being led to the infirmaries. Either had 2 bad injuries from the fight, but they both most certainly had quirk exhaustion. Although Ida's legs might have some burns, Kaminari better have more in the tank. After a showing like that, Izuku wanted to have a go at him. Mirko's right leg couldn't stop bouncing. It was moving so fast and with enough force that the entire room was shaking. Her grin left little wonder as to where her head was at. Those 2 are good, I want them both at the same time. Yeah, that would be a good time, she said lowly. Phrasing, shouted Ray, the only mother in the room who didn't like the innuendo. "You're like 30! Hawks slapped his forehead with Ryukyu rolling her eyes, although she was happy that it wasn't her needing to call out her colleague. Mirko shot to her feet, glaring at Ray. 30! I'm not 30, I'm 26. Don't think just cause you're a housewife or something I won't dash. The entire crowd and surrounding audience in the vicinity of the arena felt the air cool and their breath became visible. Most noticed their drinks starting to freeze and the thinner people started to shiver. In the VIP room, Mirko was in a clear ball of pure ice with Ray glaring out the window, not even bothering to look in her direction. All the glass in the room was frosting over and even Endeavor's flames had all gone out for an instant. Do what? I'll have you know I'm not in a good mood right now. If one were to look, one would see that Ray's eyes held a glow of incredible power within them. She gazed at her son as he walked out for his match. Endeavor was about to unfreeze the rabbit when the ice shattered, and Mirko's laughter could be heard throughout the room. Ha! I thought you were just some old housewife. Who knew you were packing that much power? Guess it takes more than a pretty face for the number 2. Much to the credit of the top hero Mirko, despite taking a blast of ice that would put most down for the count, she didn't even look to be all that slowed by it. Endeavor slinked back into his seat, careful not to draw attention to himself when his wife was in this kind of mood. He noticed since her release from the hospital she was far more willing to let him know of her displeasure with her quirk, and she had much to be displeased about if she sat and thought about it usually. All Might blurred between them, reminding the room of his presence. Enough. One word and Mirko was cowed. She wasn't foolish enough to test the number 1. She's seen him change the weather with a punch casually. Not much a rabbit can do there. Unfortunately for said rabbit, the number 1 turned his gaze her way. A single glowing blue eye that held the power to smash mountains singled her out. Being excited for challenges is one thing, being unnecessarily combative is another. I will need to ask you to leave if you cannot understand that, said All Might. He didn't mind or really care all that much if Mirko messed around with the other heroes, but he was aware of Ray's situation and didn't want Ray to have that kind of stress. She seemed to be upset by something since she left. Mirko nodded silently and sat down. She didn't want to cause more problems that could sour her professional relationships with the people in the room. The top 3 were here, and if they wanted, they could make her life very difficult. Well, only Endeavor would likely flex his influence if it got to that, but she was just antagonizing his wife, so maybe she got a bit ahead of herself. Edgeshot had largely ignored the people in the room to type into his phone. He needed to immediately send his team orders to send offers to both of those boys. Hawks scratched his neck, keeping his thoughts to himself. Rei Todoroki, Class 4 Elemental Quirk. Wife of Enji Todoroki, also Class 4 Elemental Quirk. She has been a person of interest since she was young, but no one could do anything due to the rising star's presence in her life since she was 17. I'm grateful. If Endeavor didn't swoop in and marry her, giving her his and his family's protection, those dicks at the commission would have someone like her running ops. No known hero training, no known history of fighting with her quirk, and she had that level of power and control. There is a good chance that she is more powerful than Endeavor, Hawks thought in awe. Todoroki wasn't interested in drawing out his battle to show off. He wasn't all that concerned with internship offers. Honestly, because of his last name, he would be shocked if he didn't get the most offers anyway. Tokoyami steadied himself. Todoroki was capable of producing ice and fire at immense levels. One would weaken him, the other well, the sun was nearing the arena walls. He would have one shot. Midnight cracked her whip. Fight! Like literally everyone expected, a massive iceberg blasted into existence towards Tokoyami. Unlike what everyone expected, Tokoyami retreated towards the sun and the ice followed at terrifying speeds. With the ice following him towards the light, what followed the light was shadow. And with the shadows came the familiar comfort of darkness. Within Tokoyami was the king of darkness. A massive dark shadow exploded into action from Tokoyami, keeping low behind the ice mountain that was shading them from the sun, allowing his strength to reach greater heights. Todoroki sked and swung his arm to send several blades of ice forward from him and the ice mountain next to him. Dozens of large ice pillars attacked Tokoyami and Dark Shadow, who merely roared in defiance as he smashed them all away as if they were paper. It was in the next moment that the beast of darkness was upon Todoroki, who glared. To think the Shadow Chicken would bring out my super move, he said angrily and kneeled, touching the ground with his hand covered in frost. Ice Age. Rei felt a tear fall from her eye as she watched Todoroki invoke the technique passed from her father to her, and from her to him. It was the most powerful ice attack her family was capable of. She only managed to explain it to him before her breakdown. He must have worked to master it all these years. As she looked at the fallout of the super move, she knew instinctively that he would far surpass her and her father with his ice. Izuku instinctively knew something big was coming. He stood and raised his arms while gritting his teeth. Fucking hell, he thought as he forced his quirk to work overtime to keep his class from freezing over. Ice Age. A time in which large portions of the earth are covered in glaciers and snow. An apt name for his mother's more powerful ability passed down from her family. From the epicenter of Todoroki, it looked like waves of frozen water exploded outwardly in a still frame. Dark Shadow and Tokoemi were frozen solid in white ice with the massive waves of ice exploding out over the crowd and over the entire arena. The surrounding crowd around the arena at the festival was covered in snow and ice for hundreds of meters. The sky darkened with clouds as the atmosphere itself was being affected by the sudden cold. Heroes in the crowd slowly began shattering the ice, and to the shock of those still able to watch, the ice surrounding Dark Shadow cracked and broke apart. The beast's eyes held a frenzy in them as it swiped towards Tokoemi to save him from the ice, then began to recede into the bird-faced boy. I concede, Tokoemi grunted out as he struggled to pull Dark Shadow back in. Tokoemi barely managed to hold his darker half back from rampaging as the clouds made it even darker, and his danger made Dark Shadow even angrier. It could have been dangerous for Todoroki, as he was too close to Dark Shadow in a near-frenzied state. From a high window box seat, a large torrent of flames blasted outward, covering the arena. Endeavor was visible from the window as he quickly melted all of his son's ice and freed those in the audience who were caught up in the super move. Do not use that again, Shoto! Endeavor shouted as the last of the ice melted. Well, I will say that no one could have expected that, President Mike said with a dazed light in his voice. I swear my class is absurd. Good call, Tokoemi. Todoroki didn't even acknowledge his father as he placed a hand on the still struggling Tokoemi, using his heat only in the slightest possible way to warm his classmate up. I'm sorry, he said lowly. That move was not meant for you, Todoroki said as he looked into the crowd at Midoriya, who was standing among his class, a noticeable absence of frost or steam in their area. Tokoemi sighed tiredly and stood up. It was a good showing. I hope your use of that will look favorably on me drawing that out. Todoroki nodded and walked off carefully, using the heat to unfreeze his internal body and organs that were supercooled. Outwardly he didn't look worse for wear as the heat from his father melted the ice off his body, but he had a large amount of it still inside he would need to rid himself of if he wanted to stay conscious. Izuku fell back into his seat with an overdramatic sigh. He went way too far there. I mean, thousands of civilians were caught in that. I guess I'll have to talk to him, he said with a laugh, easing the tension of his classmates around him. That was more ice than I would like to face. I'm sure I could keep myself in the fight and recover fast, but the amount of power behind a single side of him makes me apprehensive of Todoroki using both his ice and fire at the same time, Izuku thought while scratching his cheek. Then his hair shadowed his eyes for a moment. But the far large part of me is so very excited to go against him. Perhaps he'll truly push me. Lord knows only the Noma has, and that was a different type of difficulty. Oh man, now I'm all fired up. Bakugo's hands were crackling as he made to leave for his match. Clearly, Todoroki's showing was a bit much for him as well. Especially since his next opponent would be Todoroki if he managed to defeat Jiro. Who was he kidding? He was her worst matchup. Looking over, it would seem that Jiro had already left. Bakugo knew that he had a tough fight ahead of him to win the sports festival. The damn nerd and Icy Hot were tough competition. But then he saw how Sparky and class president showed speed that far surpassed his own. It would seem that he underestimated his fellow students. While most were barely worth his attention, there's some real competition here. That being said, he almost felt a bit bad about his strategy for dealing with earbuds. Jiro knew that this was going to be a bad matchup. She would give it a try cause she's not a quitter, but yet this wasn't going to be fun. Fight! Bakugo pushed both palms forward. Flashbang max. Less of a powerful explosion of force and more of sight and sound. Jiro screamed in pain as she grabbed her earbuds and waved to Midnight as she fell to her knee, overcome with pain and slight dizziness. This match is over to concession from Kyokujiro. No one did anything but offer polite applause for both competitors. I feel bad for the little listener. That was not a favorable matchup. She did the logical thing and conceded. I would not think less of her for doing so. She showed heart going out and trying despite knowing what was coming. Ah, you do care, Papa Bear! Stop talking to me. And he's back. Bakugo walked over to the still wincing girl with a small frown on his face. I don't hold back, he said, visibly struggling. It would be an insult. Jiro looked up at him and withheld a chuckle. Something about the usually screaming and boisterous boy being all shy amused her something fierce. I forgive you. Bakugo didn't even try to say he wasn't apologizing before stomping off. It just wasn't in his nature to say sorry. It felt like he was complimenting her a bit. Not that she would give him that much credit. Guy was still a bit of a dick, even if she was beginning to understand he was mostly harmless. Jiro made her way back to the stands as everyone got excited for the next match. She knew she wouldn't get to tell him this before the match, so she just closed her eyes and wished her dork good luck against Midoriya. Inko had only just calmed her heart down from the battle her baby had against the young woman that she felt could be a future daughter. When the whole place froze over from that Todoroki boy and now a boy that she considered a nephew managed to win, she had to push down the embarrassment of Mitsuki's shouting for her son. Now her son was about to walk out to fight again. This may be a bit too much for her to have come watch in person. She should have watched from home, that way she could cry in peace. That's it, baby! You got this! Mitsuki shouted with a hand on her bicep as she flexed. Mitsuki turned to her with a huge proud mama smile. Semi-finals next! What do you think is gonna happen? Inko put a finger to her cheek and thought. I know that Izuku and Kaminari are friends and have fought before, so I'm sure it will be a fun one. Todoroki and Bakugo, well... She didn't want to say. Hey! Mitsuki shouted with a glare. That boy may have the number 2 as a daddy, but Katsuki is my son and he's built from tougher stuff. Also, I don't think he would physically allow himself not to reach Izuku in the finals. Yep, another thing that Inko wasn't too excited to watch. I just hope these boys don't go too overboard, she said tiredly. I don't, laughed Mitsuki. Kaminari stood across from Izuku with his chin held high and his arms crossed. Izuku's body was facing away as he looked to the side and lazily pointed at Kaminari with a bored expression. Strangely, there was a slight wide in the arena, blowing their hair and clothes around just enough. So, you're my next opponent, bastard! Declared Izuku with a haughty sneer. Kaminari spread his arms as he smiled. It's a shame that a magnificent hero like me has to sully myself with a ruffian like you. Izuku, you punk! He shouted and began walking forward. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Oh, you're approaching me? He asked, barely withholding an evil laugh. You who knows the depths of my abilities so well, better than most? You're still capable of coming closer, knowing just how powerful I am? Like an ant approaching a hurricane, you think you have a chance at overcoming me? Izuku's voice gradually became louder as he spoke and his expression darker. Golden sparks emitted from Kaminari in short intervals as he approached. I can't beat the shit out of you from here, he said with a fierce glare. Izuku laughed darkly. Is that right? He turned his body towards Kaminari fully. Then come as close as you like, he said with a smile and started stepping forward slowly. The tension in the crowd rose with every step Kaminari and Izuku took to close the gap. The people in the crowd shifted attention from one student to the other. They didn't know what small spark would set off this powder keg. Will you two idiots start already? Shut up, Aizawa, this is amazing! Kaminari wasted no time after his teacher's interruption from what was a fun bit of banter, and sped off with his max from the very beginning. Midoriya was right, he didn't know how good he was, better than most, so he knew that he couldn't hold back. Midoriya leveled himself and took a stance. His awareness of the world within his area of effect was absolute, so he was able to sense Kaminari's approach even at these speeds. A trade of 3 punches each found that Izuku's hardiness was able to withstand the shocks that came with contact with Kaminari, and that the lightning user's hand-to-hand was far better than the last time they fought. From there, dozens of more trades happened. Izuku's physicality and experience from the dojo allowed him to move around the more dangerous hit and give a few in return. Kaminari, however, had been fighting there longer, and his speed was now at a level that Izuku needed to focus or he would be overwhelmed. Well, if he kept this fight purely hand-to-hand like he was currently doing. Izuku ducked under a punch, redirected a kick, and spun around an elbow before trying to attack with a kick of his own. Kaminari managed to dodge the kick and pushed a palm forward towards Izuku, but out of his range of contact. The manipulator looked at the motion curiously as he was out of range and didn't bother dodging or blocking. You don't know everything, Izuku, Kaminari thought with a smile. While he was an internal manipulation type emitter, he was still able to expel his lightning outward, It just wasn't the best for prolonged battles as it tired him out faster, as he wasted too much energy. But at this range, it was more akin to a short-barrel shotgun in use, not for range or control, just raw power. Izuku took the full brunt of the lightning blast, and was launched backward. Kaminari wasted no time and sped after him. For normal people, they would find their muscles seizing and overwhelmed by the pain. Izuku's mind and quirk worked at unprecedented speeds, ridding himself of the electricity, and healing the damage as he righted himself to his feet, still flying backwards. He was fully aware of Kaminari approaching him to continue his assault. Guess I should show off too, huh? I'll keep it elemental. Izuku clapped his hands and locked eyes with Kaminari. Unleash. It looked more like water to those watching, but it was most assuredly not. It was red and bright but swirling in an almost liquid fashion. Everyone who knew Izuku looked on in shock. This was either new or Izuku had been keeping this close to the chest for a while. From Izuku's slowly opening hands, in a tight swirling orb, was a ball of super bright and hot flame. His right hand kept the ball of flame, while his left was pulled back in a sort of archery-like motion. Curiously, the ball of flame began to stretch with his movements and morph almost into an arrow. Creating lightning was an accident that came from learning this. I seriously never had a reason to use it. I went more lethal with the Nomu, so I skipped right over this bad boy. Izuku thought as Kaminari made it within 1 meter of him. I would dodge, said Izuku before releasing the attack. Kaminari did as was told and dove forward just in time for the fire missile to pass him by and impact the ground behind him. He felt it before he saw it. Kaminari felt the ground shake wildly and his back heat up as if he was sitting in front of a roaring fire. Turning around, he saw a massive trench in the ground stretching towards the walls, flames coving the ground where the attack gouged through the earth. Easily 20 meters long and 8 in diameter was the aftermath of the attack. Something that could take down buildings was just fired at him. What a day. He let out a sigh as Izuku placed a knife to his back. Yeah, I give, he said with a laugh and a shake of his head. The knife was gone and Izuku moved next to him and raised his hand to extinguish the residual flames. How? Asked Kaminari. Izuku turned to him. Fire has mass, my friend. The photons that make up its appearance don't, but the base does. You've seen me control fire before, are you really that shocked? He said in wonder. Kaminari shook his head. No, I mean, how did that small fire do that? And what does unleash mean? Izuku nodded in understanding. I can make all sorts of stuff, and let's say I didn't just make fire, you know I like compound techniques after all. And that's just the name of the branch of attacks that this falls under. That was called Hell's Arrow. Kaminari laughed and rubbed his hair. You are too much, my friend, he said as they made their way off the stage and Cementhouse began to once again clean up. Endeavor frowned. Fire now, I don't like this boy, he grunted. Hawks just laughed. I don't think I'm all that surprised anymore by these kids. They're all crazy strong, especially these top 4. That Kaminari kid's speed was unheard of, and he managed to win the hand-to-hand exchange, but Midoriya is just as crazy. He took those hits and all those what's like it was nothing. I believe Midoriya utilized control over fire during his fight against those villains a few weeks ago that was made into quite the spectacle by the news, commented Ryukyu. But the level of power behind that attack, those weren't normal flames. No, they weren't, Endeavor said heavily. I couldn't control them, which means they weren't just fire. Mirko just laughed. Way to sound ominous, Endeavor. I'll just assume it's more of his crazy quirks BS and move on. No use getting all bent out of shape by it. I'm more impressed by that invisible cutting technique he displayed against Yaoyorozu when he made that ice. Not sure how you dodge or block that, she said lightly, hiding the unease from such an ability. All Might interjected before thoughts could get too dark. Young Midoriya's cleave and sever abilities are ones that he reserves for inanimate objects and medical procedures. He wouldn't use them in a fight on a person, unless he was truly pushed against the wall. Make no mistake, he has the true qualities of a hero in training, proclaimed All Might with his trademark grin. Oh well, said Hawks. On to the last semi-final. Todoroki glared towards the stands. So he has a fire attack now, he said lowly. Bakugo laughed. Of course he does. Pretty dumb to think he wouldn't, but I wouldn't worry too much. I see how you won't have to face him today, he declared with sparks blasting off his palms. Right, I have to go through you, Bakugo, Todoroki said seriously. I originally thought you'd be my toughest competition, up until the battle trials, that is. Left unsaid was who he believed to be the real challenge. Bakugo growled, clearly understanding what he was saying. Don't you dare look down on me! Fight! Ice exploded outward, and so too did Bakugo. The ice was practically slapped away as Bakugo approached, and after a second Todoroki switched tactics. With a stomp on the ground, ice spears shot towards Bakugo, who took to the air to maneuver around them. With his aerial mobility, it made it difficult for a static element that Todoroki had to produce from himself to land. With fire he could. No! Todoroki glared hatefully as he used his ice to move around the arena to reposition, and Bakugo stopped flying to point both his hands toward him. Similar to the race earlier, dozens of glowing balls shot out of his palms, carpet bombing the arena. All the ice was shattered, and the arena was covered in craters. Todoroki was protected by creating ice in front of him, but none of it lasted that long under Bakugo's assault. As the game continued, Todoroki attacked with ice that Bakugo would blow up. The elemental noticed that Bakugo was getting stronger. It was as if the more he exerted himself, the stronger he became. Todoroki mentally groaned. He just remembered that Bakugo's quirk was from his sweat. Now the whole thing became a bit easier. Frost fell from Todoroki's side as he sent out as much freezing air as possible. It was the first step in Ice Age, without going so far as to create ice, vastly cooling the environment around him. Bakugo blasted himself backward and higher with TSK. Seems his opponent was trying to keep him from sweating, which was an annoyingly smart strategy that he didn't think the melodramatic boy would think of. Oh well, time to go for broke. Using his explosions to spin midair, he began to set up his strongest attack. He used a smaller version on it against Weird Hair earlier. A small tornado of explosions compared to the cyclone of power that was his trump card. Todoroki created massive amounts of ice on the ground and in front of him, to the point that the entire arena ground from the stage to the walls was solid ice. From there he sent pillars into the air to disrupt Bakugo. The cyclone moved towards Todoroki's stationary position with furious speed. The pillars that were shot towards it were all torn through with little issue as the force of all the miniature explosions batted them away. With a base made, Todoroki rapidly lowered the air temperature and readied his quirk. The cyclone approached and was within a single meter before both boys made their moves. A massive glacier amount of ice shot from Todoroki, but it disintegrated nearly instantly under Bakugo's attack. The force of the cyclone explosion cracked and shattered not only the ice base Todoroki made, but also the concrete stage, the ground around them, and much of the walls were cracked and shattered under the force. That being said, the recoil from the attack launched both boys at the epicenter backwards. But only one had prepared to keep themselves grounded. Bakugo's back touched the ruined grass before his brain could process that he was knocked backward. He shot into the air with his quirk before screaming angrily. No, that wasn't how this was supposed to end, damn it! Not by dumbering out! He screamed at himself while furiously rubbing his hair. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Todoroki, despite winning, was the more hurt by the trade and only just managed to drag himself towards the tunnel to leave. Bakugo wanted to continue to scream angrily, but just closed his eyes and stomped off. Neither of the boys even heard the thunderous applause, too absorbed in their thoughts. The festival was approaching the finale. It would be the dual elemental versus the manipulator. And there you have it, quirk connoisseurs. The electrifying conclusion to our What If Deku Had Matter manipulation series. Can you believe we've reached the end of this wild ride? I want to extend a massive thank you to Blanduzername for inspiring this epic adventure, and to all of you for your unwavering support along the way. Don't forget to smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts on the finale, and share this video with your fellow heroes in training. Until next time, stay awesome, stay curious, and keep on exploring the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. Peace out.